It is Monday, May 20, no, it's not May, it's June 20th, and we do have a quorum, so I'll call this meeting. Oh my gosh, okay. I'll start over. Good evening. It is Monday, June 12th, and we do have a quorum, so I will call this meeting to order. The first order of business tonight is agenda approval, and we do have two updates to the agenda that I wanted to let the public know about. We have an item added to our consent agenda. It's a memorandum of understanding between Education Minnesota Edina and Edina Public Schools. So that has been added to our consent agenda, and the Raptor presentation is going to be moved to a discussion item. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of tonight's agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Oh, anyone say nay? Okay, the agenda is approved. Dr. Stanley, would you please review tonight's agenda for us?
Absolutely. So we are really excited for our Excellence in Action. We have students and Principal Rickenberg here to talk about the process that they've used as they've gone through losing trees from ash borer. And so we're really excited to hear from them about that. We took some time back in March to analyze our analyze our strategic plan during a core planning team process. And we actually have the facilitators of the group here to share about the outcomes from that. We are moving our Raptor visitor management report down to discussion. That'll take place. We have discussion about our preliminary budget recommendations. We have updates on our comprehensive literacy plan for both elementary, secondary, legislative action committee update. We're going to talk about, or the board wants to talk about their liaison roles. We have some policies that we're going to go through. And then there are a few action items, including our assessment plan. And then we'll have committee updates and updates from me.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley. Our first order of business is our Excellence in Action. And tonight, as Dr. Stanley talked about, we lost 106 ash trees to emerald ash borer at Highlands Elementary School. But due to support from a lot of different partners, we were able to plant over 85 trees. So I would like to welcome up Dr. Kara Rickenberg, principal of Highlands, parents John and Elizabeth Hagen. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, excellent. Their first grader, Ben. Welcome, Ben. And parent Jeff Schuster and his fourth grader, Zoe. Welcome, Zoe. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, thank you for having us tonight. We have a presentation to share with you. The last time I spoke to you about trees, it was about the loss of them, and it feels like it was a really long time ago that we did that, but we have done several different things to fix it, and so I have some great participants with me today to help share the story of the action that's happened since you've last seen it. So if you could please click the slide. We have a little bit of a timeline here, and you'll see in December we found out from the City of Edina Forestry Department that we had 20 ash trees that they noted were infested with the emerald ash borer. And then doing an account of the trees, we realized that we had 106 ash trees on the property with a high likelihood and probability that all of them were infected with EAB and were requested to remove them. And so I worked with Eric Hamilton to figure out the best course of action, and we looked at lots of different options to try to figure out what we could do, because the woods at Highland are very important to us and part of our learning community. And at that time, Mert and I came to the school board to talk about the fact that we would be moving forward to remove the trees. And then we shared it with our community. And I want to introduce Miss Zoe, who I've been super fortunate to know for quite some time. And it was no surprise to me when I came to school one day and found this letter on my computer.
Dear Dr. Rickenberg, hello, Kara. I feel super sad that 106 trees are getting cut down. I feel like this because a lot of the trees that are getting cut down are really big, and those are going to leave big, wide open spaces, so I propose every tree that gets cut down, 2 trees get planted. So much is getting cut down, so please consider what I've proposed and have a great weekend. Sincerely, Zoe Schuster.
Now, as I said, I've known Miss Zoe, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to also be her older sister's teacher. And I know when one of the Schuster girls says something, to act upon it, right, Miss Zoe? Yes. And so I had already done some digging and knew that I was going to be looking at tree trust as an opportunity. And lo and behold, we were very fortunate. I had submitted the application, and within a day, the coordinator had gotten back to me. I think part of it was because she has a working relationship with Luther, who is our City of Edina forester, and she works a lot within the City of Edina. So she was thrilled at the opportunity to grow within our schools. Part of the requirements of being a tree trust program, a tree trust site, is having a green team committee. And so I threw out the call to our community and promptly had 13 parents um, get back to me immediately. And I will say, too, that of the 13, 12 of them were dads. And I had a PTO president commend me on the opportunity of involvement that I had in dads. And so I have 2 of these awesome dads with me now, and I want to introduce them and let them share what their interest was and why they became involved. And so I'll pass it to John first.
I'm John Haugen. So I'm a sustainability consultant. I work in sustainability. I think about trees a lot. I'm also a member of the City of Edina Energy and Environment Commission. And my wife is not here. She's with our 3-year-old. She works at Room and Board, and we kind of connected some dots. And one of her vendors that she works with reprocesses diseased ash trees into furniture. So we were able to work together with Room and Board. The vendor's named Wood from the Hood. Edina Seasonal Services was the removal vendor. They were awesome. And with, of course, Eric and Kara and sort of stitching together this plan, we essentially were able to harvest a good portion of the usable wood, and it's currently being made into furniture. So it's a cool circular story, and that was definitely something that took some doing, but fortunately we're all kind of the right people were involved in that. From the City of Edina EEC perspective, tree canopy is very important to our climate action plan. To state the obvious, trees are important for beauty, for air quality, for shade. So maintaining that canopy is really important. And it's something that I personally feel passionate about, and I think the City of Edina Energy and Environment Commission and sort of city staff, everybody's really invested in protecting our canopy. So it's really cool to see the schools doing the same.
Thank you. You can click the slide too.
Just add on my comments. Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff Schuster, so Zoe's dad here. No expertise like John, but I volunteered because I live right by where the school is. The Woodlandia actually backs up into my property, and so got to see it every day, especially after COVID and the hybrid work. I'm home more often, and so get to see Zoe run up the hill to go off to school, get to see the kids play in the backyard. I also got to see the big trees getting taken down. So, I mean, they're big. You should go see them. There are some big trees that got taken down back there. So volunteered to kind of lend that, I guess, that local perspective, and ended up working hard. So I'll stay in chronological order, and you can talk about the actual planting day.
So John and Jeff were 2 of our parents, like I said, that helped volunteer. And we met every other week for about 2 months, about 2.5 months, I believe, to get the planning and organization. We worked with Tree Trust, and they created a plan, and we put in 85 trees and shrubs. The shrubs went predominantly in the wooded area to stop the development of buckthorn, and they're edible, so there's different nuts and berries to encourage wildlife to come back into that area. We're building outdoor learning areas, worked on re-establishing our interior courtyard, and lots of different great things happened. So we had almost 600 kids in one day planting. We had about 75 parent volunteers. We had just about the same number of volunteers from Centerpoint Energy. We had the City of Edina people out. It was a lot. There was a whole lot of action. Zoe, you want to talk about planting day? Sure.
I liked how we got to like actually see the tree being planted, and we got to like dig the hole and see how there was a lot more greenery in the area than there was, and probably seeing the trees grow and seeing them get bigger.
So our next steps is we have Wise Guys at Highlands this year, and we have wagons and buckets that we are working on watering. We're going to continue then to reestablish our area. We got a small grant from 9 Mile Creek Watershed to work with Metro Bloom, and Metro Bloom is a national leader actually in habitat reforestation and water conservation and stewardship. And so I'm meeting with them on Friday to do a walkabout of the whole schoolyard. And then also with the connection with Luther from the city of Edina, he has already been in contact with other grants that he wants to partner with. So lots of really cool opportunities from what was a pretty significant loss. The day of the cutting, maybe I know that Miss Zoe was one of them too, was a sad day, the day before. We had kids in the trees hugging them to say the goodbye. So it was a big impact for us. Any questions or clarifications? Board members?
I'm going to share a comment. So I'm a parent of some Highlands alums. I am a former employee of Highlands, and I want to thank you guys. The woods are a really special place. They're so, so special. My little boy played in the woods, the one who just graduated high school, and my other one who's going off to high school. So I went and saw the woods at the end of the year just to also say goodbye and to be present in the space. And so I wanted to say to all of you, especially you, Kara, thank you for honoring what an important place that is, what an important impact it has on our students, and for respecting that and making sure that that tradition stays on with Highlands. So thank you all so very much.
Director Bergman?
I just wanted to ask, since you planted the trees and you're hoping that they're going to grow, are you going to come back every year and take a picture with the same tree so you can see how you grew with it? Just a suggestion.
So it gets extra credit because we've been watering the shrubs on the weekends. So.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, to take care of your community and take care of your neighborhood school like that is amazing. So thank you so much for your efforts.
Director Bergman? Not Bergman. Oh my gosh. Gabler.
You know, as I was, thank you for your presentation tonight and being here. And as you were presenting, I couldn't help but think about our strategic plan in strategy E that talks about engaging parents, schools, and community. And I think this is a perfect example of that. You talked about all those partners that came in. And Kara, one of the gifts that you bring to our district is all of the partnerships and connections that you have. And as a board member who has a Highlands student, a current Highlands student, watching that process, you know, whether it was the neighbors, whether it was people that were like, hey, how can we put our heads around this and make this a really, which is an unfortunate situation, how can we make the best out of it? And what you've modeled for our kids, I think is really important. And so Ben and Zoe, you'll be able to come back when you're our age and look at those trees that you planted as elementary, and you're giving that to all the Highlands kids that will come behind you. And so thank you for that. And thanks for being here tonight.
Of course. Thank you. Great. Thank you so much.
You're
Wonderful.
welcome.
Wonderful job. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. Next, we're going to move on to our hearing for members of the public. Pursuant to Board Policy 206, we ask that you do not duplicate information that has been previously presented. If you have a complaint about individual employees, board members, or students in the district, please direct these comments to the appropriate site administrator, the superintendent, or submit them in writing to the board. The board typically does not respond to or have discussion on issues presented, but questions raised during presentations will receive follow-ups as directed by the board. I would like to remind all speakers that your presentations are limited to 3 minutes. And when you have 15 seconds left of your 3 minutes, I will prompt you to wrap up your presentation. We do have one speaker tonight, Jesse Bergman. Welcome. When the green light's on, the microphone is on. Oh, no, that's okay. There you go.
Good evening. My wife and I are EHS graduates, and we have lived here most of our lives. She wasn't able to attend tonight, so I'm speaking for the both of us. I'm here to inform you of what happened to my son at Concord and correct the actions of the administration, which were the following: violated EPS policy 506 and 514, breached confidentiality, mishandled the use of discipline, and lied to the third grade student. We have lived here because we value the EPS education system, but after these violations, we must spend money that we don't have to protect our child and leave EPS due to the lack of leadership. My son, Eddie Bergman, an 8-year-old third grade boy, has been attending Concord since kindergarten and has had no issues from any teacher or classmates during those years. He loves school so much that each summer he asks when school starts because he can't wait to go back. On January 10th, Eddie was issued an out-of-school suspension for bullying. He called the girl's hat ugly and made fun of her lunchbox. Afterwards, the assistant principal stated there were 2 incidents in October. Neither were reported to us or documented on file. We attended a teacher conference on November 8th, and his teacher had nothing but accolades to say about how he was such a joy to have. No mention of the undocumented October incidents. EPS has policies in place to create a safe and welcoming environment for all. For Eddie, the administration breached policies as it pertains to discipline and student confidentiality. Policy 506 provides 17 discipline options to choose from when discipline needs to be enforced. Policy 514 states, quote, schools should avoid using punitive discipline, detention, suspensions, expulsions, if any other method or consequence can be used with fidelity, unquote. The administration also breached confidentiality as the assistant principal was sharing Eddie's plans of touring schools with the other family. These inconsistencies continued after his suspension. On January 18th, Eddie was teased for dressing up for a school visit. There was no action by the administration. On January 24th, Eddie was moved to a new classroom against our direction for the remainder of the year. Post-suspension, Eddie was teased for moving classrooms by other kids. When kids asked why he was moved, the administration lied to the students and, quote, said to balance out class sizes of boys and girls, unquote. On May 9th, the assistant principal emailed me about a boy intentionally harming Eddie at recess, and that boy's parents were notified, and he apologized to Eddie. The administration's inconsistency with discipline is highlighted here since Eddie was first out of school suspended, then we were notified, and then forced by the administration to move classrooms. The May 9th incident did not follow the same process. We have appropriately disciplined our son for what happened in January. Last week, Eddie was happy to leave Concord because kids teased him for being suspended and changing classrooms. His Concord experience wasn't a safe environment, and the administration didn't care and recklessly violated EPS policies. We have provided many families with this detail, and they are considering pulling their kids out of EPS as this incident has gained momentum of what is happening in our schools. Our intent here is to inform you, correct the process, and be mindful that many people in this community have grown up here, like myself, and have valued EPS as a prestigious public school. Thank you for your time. And I want to just say, his teachers were phenomenal, phenomenal. He has great teachers. That school is amazing with the teachers. This is not about the teachers. So, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to a presentation on our strategic core planning process. I'd like to welcome Terry Stalock and Paula O'Laughlin from Partner ED, who led district staff, students, and community members in a 2-day process in March to monitor, assess, and provide feedback on our progress towards our strategic plan outcomes and benchmarks. Welcome.
Thank you. We are delighted to be here, and it was certainly fun to see the student presentations to kick off the evening. That certainly is what we experienced during our time with the core planning team, was a focus on students, with a lot of students actually even being present. So board members, superintendent family, thanks for allowing us to be here tonight. Do we forward the slides, or? Perfect. Wow. Thank you. So tonight what we want to do is just briefly introduce ourselves. We'll talk about the purpose of these yearly reviews of the strategic plan. We'll give a little bit of an overview of the process, and then we welcome any conversations that or any questions that you have. The next slide just points out our team. Denise Toncelli is the founder of Partner Ed, former superintendent. I'm also a former superintendent, and my colleague Paula is a former board member. So we have sat in your shoes and have worked through strategic plans for many years. As you know, the next slide, please. As you know, the strategic plan really is the foundation of the school district. It gives superintendents and staff and families direction and focus. One of the hallmarks of strategic planning is community engagement. I love that was referenced, Director Gabler, on this presentation, but that certainly is a big part of your process as well. The next slide, specifically to your process, I think this is a really good reminder for you and for the viewing public that not only did you spend time a few years ago creating the strategic plan, but you take really seriously the monitoring process. So I just want to draw attention to that slide and to talk about the purpose of yearly bringing people back to support the monitoring process. There's a core planning team that comes back together yearly to review the progress and to see if there are any recommendations or modifications that they have, giving those recommendations then to superintendent, the team, and the board to see what adjustments have to be made. So really a great process. You're not just waiting to see what happens in 5 years, but actually monitoring not just the data, but also the systems and the processes along the way. Next slide. Certainly, this is a document that is very well known to all of you, but again, really focusing on the mission, the core beliefs, and then the strategies that show the work that's done in order to make sure that that mission comes to life for each of your students. So the next slide shares a little bit about the process. We've got a few slides that also review that as well. Dr. Stanley provided a grounding activity. We had an opportunity. Many of the core planning team has been on the team for years, but there were new people. So we had a chance to bring them up to speed as well. Did a little overview, and then really the highlights was reviewing, having the presentations of each of the strategies, reviewing the process, and having opportunities for the core planning team to seek additional information and clarification. We also went through a SOAR process, which Paula will be sharing, and then some of those key messages for the community. So real briefly, just a few slides to showcase that. Dr. Stanley welcoming the group and providing a grounding at the beginning. The next slide, just I think there might have been one in between, maybe not. But just the progress reports that we had there. The next slide actually then moves to the SOAR analysis. So I'll let Paula take it from here. Great, thank you. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the SWOT analysis. We engage in a SOAR process that you'll see in your either your booklet or on the side, standing for the strengths, the opportunities, the aspirations, and the results. And the reason why we use this process with boards, is that it really is a framework that is based on appreciative inquiry, really honing in and identifying those strengths, and then looking at where are the ways which can be built on those strengths to achieve those desired results. And the insights that can be gleaned from this really help provide kind of those building blocks, if you will, for Dr. Stanley and her team of ways to continue to build and to improve as they monitor the strategic plan and implement aspects of it as well. So you'll see, if we can please move to the next slide there, you'll see the committee engaging in the SOAR process. We won't go through, read all of them, but just want to highlight a few. I won't speak for Terry, but I think that she would agree that we found the group to be incredibly student-focused. And so often the conversation as we were working with the different groups, just coming back to, and how do we meet the needs of each and every student? And how do we engage all of our families? And how do we make sure that every voice is included and part of this process so that we can be really meaningful and intentional about how we are delivering our services and our supports. So you'll see on strategy A, just a couple to note on the strengths. Again, just really centering student voice. A lot of conversation about the qualified, committed, passionate, and dedicated staff that you have. Aspirations, again, going back to how can we really live into those systems and structures to build those up to meet the needs of each and every student. Looking at the opportunities, again, where can we provide extra support for our students? And then how can we make sure that every family has access to those supports to support their child or their children? And then the results, again, going back to the academic excellence, supporting students in their reading and their other core areas, and again, closing those gaps to meet the needs of every student. Strategy B, just a few to highlight there, the strengths. Again, family, parent, and student engagement. Aspirations, how do we increase engagement for students who are from historically underrepresented or underserved groups? The opportunities, increasing gender equity within Edina Public Schools, and then really looking at to differentiate the kind of professional learning and development that's ongoing for your staff. And then in results, how do we make sure that every student, every teacher, every family member, every community member feels a sense of belonging and feels safe in Edina? All right, looking at strategy C, foster positive learning environments and whole student support. Again, going back to student voice, amplifying their needs and their desires and what they are wanting from their education. Aspirations, a lot of conversation around mental health. Mental health not just for our students, but also for our staff and for the community. How to communicate that with the different resources and access opportunities that are available, and how to make sure that students can easily access those. Opportunities, again, going back to a lot of how to engage families, and especially around that mental health component. And then results, looking again, just kind of to echo that theme around mental health, making sure that there is systemic collection of data to make sure that they can monitor that and deliver those supports for all students. All right, strategy D, looking at the strengths. So we had the good fortune to hear from the Somali Student Association, and that was just a highlight and one of the many ways that your district is amplifying and really centering student voice to make changes on behalf of all students. The aspirations, how do we remove barriers? What does that look like from a systems level? Opportunities, continuing to offer and increase the ways in which students can engage to affect change in their schools and in the greater community. And then results, again, going back to that sense of belonging for all students and all families. And then just a couple highlights from the last strategy, strategy E, looking at building on the community education, that strong foundation, the continued outreach, looking at aspirations, looking at launching the 6 to 12 pathways, and again, removing barriers. Opportunities, what are the ways in which that opportunities can be increased for students with special needs? And then removing barriers, looking at how can transportation, how might that look differently so that all students can participate in various activities and other opportunities that exist. And then results, looking at family surveys, increased enrollment, and again, going back to how do we measure and make sure that each student and staff and community member feels that sense of belonging and inclusion. All right, And then we moved on to the mind map analysis. We focused on 3 specific questions. We talked about what are the celebrations that we can highlight, what might be modified, and then what might we recommend. So looking at the totality of all of the different strengths and opportunities and aspirations and results, the group came up with the following, and again, just highlighting a few celebrations. First and foremost, the amazing students that you have. Students who are well represented on the core planning team and just brought such a vibrance and an authenticity, and the impact is immeasurable, I think, in terms of them sharing their stories and how that was able to shape the conversation throughout the 2 days that we worked with them. Recommendations. So looking at continuing the foundation of equity in Edina Public Schools, more student leadership opportunities, building on that. Again, kind of going back to that SOAR analysis, what are some of those strengths that can be built upon and expanded?
We always ask to end each process and we say, you know, the 40 member, 45, 50 member team, they were in the room together. And several of your board members were also there. The administrative team was there. But there were a lot of people in the school district, staff, parents, students who weren't there. So we always say at the end, what do you want to make sure that those who weren't there, what are those messages? And as ambassadors, what do you want to be sure that the rest of the community hears? So these key messages are really important. I think that whole notion of the strategic plan is alive, and we continue to breathe life into it. And this review is a really important part of that, because there were recommendations that came forward in terms of modifications or shifting direction, even though goals were the same, just making sure that we stayed on track. Making sure that we work to expand that definition of excellence. There's a lot of pride in this community, and that clearly is represented with the core planning team as well as the strategic plan. Being intentional about having that diverse group, making sure that there were a lot of students on that group was really important. Making sure that the letters, and I think that as we look at the end of the legislative session and we see the importance of the science of reading, there was a lot of great energy around that and huge commitment to continue that professional development and work. Making sure that we're using evidence-based practices, open to expanding awareness of what's happening and what our students need, continuing to elevate their voice, and then making sure that we continue to tell the story of how much EPS values students and values the success of each and every student. So just really fun to be thinking about what else we want to continue to do in the strategic plan to make sure that students are always the center and are successful. So just a couple other on the next slide, key messages. Oh, modifications. Sorry, we're just a little different order, but I think Paul already kind of talked about that. So again, we just want to thank you for the opportunity to spend days with your team. I think you can go on the next slide. I think the other direction. Perfect. Excellent. But it was a joy to spend time with such a committed group, and we have complete confidence that Dr. Stanley and her team got the information that they needed in order to make sure that their work continues to be really focused on students. So thank you. We'd be delighted to take any questions that you have.
Thank you so much for coming and presenting tonight. Before we go to questions, I wanted to let board members know that I know at a work session before we talked about potentially the need to reprioritize or lengthen some items in our strategic plan. That discussion is going to potentially be at our retreat. And so this discussion tonight is really to hear the results of our core planning meeting. So any questions that we have about what was brought to us tonight, feel free to ask questions around that, but any discussion we have around what we might want to do as an institution will be at a later date. Now I'll open up to questions or comments. Director Green.
I don't know if I'm just going first or what's going on. Thank you for this. This was great. My first time attending the core planning meeting, so it was great to be there and be in that room with all the energy. My question is, as I was reading through this, I know one of the things that came up a lot was educator feedback, educator wellness, educator voice. And as I looked through this, it seemed like it was captured as more of a wellness piece, taking care of our educators. But it sounded like I think a lot of that feedback was making sure their voice was heard in the process of planning. And I didn't really see that in here unless I missed it. And so I didn't know if you could talk a little bit, if you remember that, or if that didn't bubble up to the top. But I know I heard it there, so I just wanted to bring that up here.
Thanks for the question. You know, I think you're right. A lot of what we heard was, and I think one of the strategies even calls out the student, the well-being and the social emotional needs of students, but making sure that that was also part of staff. I think that we can definitely review that. You know, I think one of the things that was obvious to us was the inclusive committees and processes where staff were a part of that. But maybe, I know you mentioned something about the surveying too, to make sure we had voice in that.
Yes, and I was just looking back to around staff retention and you know, what were some of those things that could add to staff feeling more, perhaps more included, more grounded, more connected to some of the things that were happening in the schools. But to Terry's point, we can definitely make sure that is called out because I think absolutely that was consistent with what we heard as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think two of the results, if we look at the strategic direction D, with those results was staff retention and then increased staff engagement and specific employee groups. So that's definitely, because now you're exactly right. There was conversation around, we often had certified staff represented, but are all staff represented?
Right.
Yeah, thanks for calling that to our attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's my only question.
Any other, yep. Director Shaw.
Yep, I've got one. So I was trying to kind of follow the path that kind of, it felt like there was a giant funnel and it kind of brought down to some more pointed things. And one of the pieces that I felt like we have heard many times, not just in this big funnel, but that I don't see once again making it to the bottom, is hearing from students. I know it was called out in here, like more intentional coordination at the high school. I think it was the high school that they mentioned it, around when teachers are giving tests, or right, like, so we've heard that. We've lost count of the number of times students have come to us and said, this is a problem, this is causing me stress, anxiety, mental health problems, right? Like, we've heard it. And so I saw that in there and I was excited, but then I didn't see it kind of funnel down. And I saw some comments that talk about, you know, maybe looking at displaying proficiency or showing my learning in a different way, right? Like, I learn differently. And I felt like it was kind of making it to the funnel, to the bottom of the funnel, and then it didn't. And so I want to make sure, and maybe this is a question for you, Dr. Stanley, too, is this the end result of what you're going to take away, or should there be hope that those things that I'm recognizing, okay, we're hearing it again, right? Like, I was at the last core planning one, not this one, I couldn't attend, but the one before, and I'm like, okay, we're hearing the same things. When are they going to make it kind of to that bottom of the funnel?
Yeah, so I hear a couple of questions in there. You're seeing the bottom of the funnel as a result. Yes. You're seeing that very specifically there. So just to talk a little bit about the process, the community understands that as well. Many thoughts were captured via sticky notes. There were a good 3,000 or 4,000 sticky notes that were in there, and students are putting their voice up there. So when this information is taken and put into an umbrella under there, we still have those sticky notes. Actually, Ann typed all of that stuff up for us. And we move down through an administrative perspective to the actual day-to-day pieces. These are representing taking those thoughts and putting them into an umbrella. as opposed to, for instance, the results listing, I don't know, there are probably 60 or 70 results, very specific results for schools or for grade band levels, if that makes sense.
Anything else? Great. Well, thank you so much. It was a great process and appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciated it too. Great. Thank you.
We're now going to move on to our consent agenda. Is there anything anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We will now vote by roll call to approve the consent agenda. Oh, we don't have to. We will now vote to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The consent agenda is approved. We're going to move on to our discussion items, and just for clarity's sake for people following along and for the board, we're going to discuss the Raptor report after the comprehensive literacy plan celebrations, but before the secondary framework. Our first discussion item is our preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2023 for the 2023-2024 school year. I'd like to welcome Business Director Mert Woodard.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the school board, Superintendent Stanley, colleagues, and all those in attendance tonight. We're here to continue the discussion from our June 1st work session and our work session earlier tonight regarding the 2024 fiscal year budget. We're going to briefly go over the executive summary that I've prepared for tonight's agenda. And also, I'd like to remind you that everything that has been shared within that executive summary is contained somewhere on our public-facing website. So should those be interested in additional details, please visit the Business Services website as well as previous board packets. Something that's unique to government finance compared to corporate or private finance is the existence of a formally adopted budget. It's been said that the government's budget is a depiction of its values, and so we feel very strongly about including those values within all the documents and artifacts that we've presented so far. Dr. Stanley's made a great point of being intentional about leading us and grounding us with that vision and mission before we enter into any decision-making or options creation. And so we presented that here on page 1. On page 2, there's a description of the governmental fund structure, which is promulgated by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which governs the way we account for school district finance across the country. Edina Public Schools uses 5 main funds: the general fund, food service fund, debt service fund, building construction fund, and community services fund. Of course, the general fund is the largest and most significant of those funds, and that fund accounts for the day-to-day operations of the school district. So all of our licensed teachers, our special education program, our regular instruction, to and from pupil transportation, school athletics, et cetera, et cetera. The purpose of the other funds is very straightforward, so I won't go into too much detail before arriving at those funds during my presentation tonight. Page 3 of the report describes the program and object categories. Once a revenue or expenditure is categorized within a fund, it is then further categorized by program or object. The object is the most basic level description of activity that occurs within a school district, and the program is the activity for which that object belongs. For example, a salary or benefit would be an object, and the program would be the purpose, or for example, secondary instruction, administration, etc. There are over 14,000 combinations that the school district uses each year. So while each individual combination may be inconsequential, the aggregate of those combinations begins to paint a picture and begins to describe the priorities the school district has in terms of what it funds on a day-to-day basis. The individual fund level in this executive summary is organized by object. So on each fund, you'll see a row for the object series. The June 20th special meeting materials will include appendices which describe in further detail all of the expenditures which will be approved, hopefully by the school board next week. So stay tuned for that. Page 4 of the executive summary provides the entire district revenue and expenditure budgets for all governmental funds. I'll get into more detail about the budget when we get to the individual fund detail. However, I'd like to remind everyone that while the historic education fund increases that we experienced and that were signed into law on May 24th by Governor Walz, the bulk of the budget development actually took place several months earlier, beginning in October of 2022, which is the reason for the $4 million cost containment process, which I'll describe in just a little bit. The overall decrease in fund balance that you'll see on page 4, revenues of $191 million, offset by revenues of $196 million, is no cause for alarm. That's a planned decrease, which relates exclusively to the building construction fund. Again, I'll provide more details momentarily. Moving on to page 6, before describing the general fund detail, it's super important to talk about enrollment. Enrollment is the basis for about 80% of our revenues. You get as much revenue as the students that you serve. You'll notice that in fiscal year 21, we saw a drastic decline in the number of students that we served, like many other school districts in the state and country due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, unlike many school districts in the state and country, we noticed a severe rebound in the number of students that we're serving. Very strong enrollment, both in fiscal year 22 and in the current fiscal year, which is a testament to the strong programming that we provide both to our residents and also to some non-resident families. We serve about 1,900 families who open enroll into Edina. We're a very highly sought after district. We serve about 900 students from neighboring districts such as Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, St. Louis Park, and Hopkins, and we're very proud of the programs that we offer to everyone. We're anticipated to serve about 8,563 students next year. That's not a pure head count, that's the average daily membership of all of our students. K through 12, we're enrolled at about 8,530 as of today, so the additional 33 or so students, the aggregate of our pre-K students, who count for about 0.28 of an ADM. So we'll see about 64 additional students pre-K added to that figure for the total of 8,563. Also, please note that we'll be adding 2 additional sections to our dual language immersion program at Countryside Elementary for an additional 48 students. So 2 first grade classrooms and 2 kindergarten classrooms next year, 2 sections added each year until we have a full K through 5 cohort. So very proud of that as well. Page 6 describes our general fund. Of course, that's the fund, as I mentioned previously, that accounts for the vast majority of the district's operations. Early this school year, we performed an analysis and forecast of general fund operations were we to continue to maintain all existing staff and all existing programs in fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024. So we applied an inflationary factor based on our best assumptions at the time to all of those programs, and discovered that were we to maintain our programs unchanged, we would have a $4 million deficit. Once that information was shared with the school board, we immediately enacted the budget reduction, reallocation, and revenue generation process and met with various stakeholders, all student groups, or parent groups rather, at schools, district administration, other stakeholders, to develop a plan to contain the district's expenditures by $4 million. We're proud to report that the total aggregate of that $4 million cost containment process resulted in a direct student impact of less than 20% of the $4 million proposed. That was always our intention from the outset, and so we're happy to report that we were able to achieve that. 4 months after the district concluded its cost containment process, the legislative session was finished with several improvements to education funding above and beyond what the district originally forecasted. The key improvements were the increase to the basic education formula of 4%, or $275 per pupil unit. That will add $1.3 million above our original estimate, which was for only 2%. That was the average for the previous 10 years rather, which is why we went with that figure instead of the 4%. We've now revised our revenue budgets to include the additional 2%. The main increase to school revenue in Minnesota for the next biennium is the increase to the special education cross-subsidy aid. The current fiscal year, we are receiving 6.43% of the calculated cross-subsidy. Over the next 4 fiscal years, will receive 44%. That's going to be an increase of about $3 million to district revenue. So that's a huge bonus for all districts in the state of Minnesota. Finally, English language learner revenue is increasing from $724 per pupil unit to $1,228 per pupil unit. We'll receive that amount for each English learner that we serve, those who qualify rather, and that's about 400 students. So we'll see an additional $240,000 above and beyond what our estimates were. The total of the additional revenues that we expect to receive above our original estimates is $4.8 million. At this time, we are not certain over the additional expenditures will incur as a result of the 65-plus mandates that have been imposed upon school districts. So at this time, we're recommending that the additional revenue simply fall to the fund balance and that we determine how we deploy those in the coming weeks and months. Therefore, our recommendation is that this time we approve a revenue budget of $154,449,311 in the general fund, with an expenditure budget of $149,411,639. Excuse me, $149,411,639. It's a big number. That will leave our unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal year 24 at 8.7%, which is well above the board established minimum of 6%, but below the high end of the minimum fund balance percentage of 10%. The overall district fund balance in the general fund is anticipated to be at around 16.2% at the end of fiscal year 24, and that figure is greater than the unassigned fund balance because it includes other categories such as our operating capital, staff development, committed fund balance, and assigned fund balances. The 16.2% would be a considerable increase over the prior 3 fiscal years, however, still lagging behind some of our comparable districts who operate at around 20%. So important to keep that in note. The exact description of the fund balances and all the assignments is detailed on page 11, which we'll get to in just a moment. Page 7 describes the food service fund and how we anticipate that to end at fiscal year 2024. The food service fund is used to account for the sale of meals to students. The fund has historically operated very well from a financial perspective with fund balances of excess of 30%, which generates some interesting comments from the Department of Ed, who seek to maintain lower fund balances, and we're looking at ways to allocate those funds to improve our meals or add newer equipment to our sites. We expect strong financial performance to continue in the next year, especially due to the fact that universal free meals has been adopted by the state. We anticipate that participation will increase. However, at this time, we're maintaining a conservative posture, and we won't increase those estimates until about mid-year next year, when we can actually analyze trend changes within families who send meals to school with their students. So at the moment, we are proposing that we have revenue activity of $3.7 million, offset by an equal amount of expenditures for no change in fund balance. Very confident that that fund will continue to be super strong financially. The community service fund is very similar to the general fund, or food service fund rather, in that it has a very healthy overall fund balance. This district has a very strong level of appetite for our before and after school programming. We anticipate that demand will continue. In fact, at times demand is outstripping our ability to meet that demand. That's not going to change next school year, and we're anticipating an increase of about $188,000 to that fund. Page 9 describes our building construction fund. As I mentioned earlier, there's a planned spend down in this fund, which is typical. Typically, you will issue bonds, voter approved or otherwise, major construction projects throughout the district. In year 1, you'll receive the funds, and in the subsequent years, you'll utilize those funds to complete projects. So over time, you'll see a gradual decrease, theoretically down to 0. So this fund includes the finishing of the bus garage project, which should be substantially completed by the end of this school year. The Countryside Elementary addition, which should be substantially complete and in operation by winter break of next school year. And also the long-term facilities maintenance plan at the high school, which will be completed over the next 4 fiscal years. And so you'll see that fund balance of a projected $6.5 million at the end of next year slowly deplete itself over the remaining 4 years of that project. The final governmental fund that we'll be reviewing tonight is the debt service fund. This is perhaps the easiest fund to understand. When we issue district voter bonds or long-term facilities bonds, we receive taxpayer revenues to pay off principal and interest. So in 1 year, we'll receive the revenue, and in the subsequent year, we'll disperse those funds on the scheduled principal and interest payment dates. The state of Minnesota requires us to levy for 105% of our scheduled principal and interest payments. The additional 5% is then repaid to taxpayers in a subsequent year as sort of a credit or a debt excess is what they call it. So by fiscal year 2039, assuming we don't issue any additional debt, you'll see that fund balance figure, which is anticipated to be $3.2 million at the end of fiscal year 24, work its way down to zero. Now is a good time to also remind those who are listening tonight that our AAA credit rating, which is highly coveted, we're one of 3 in the state and about 70 across the country to have that rating, was reaffirmed twice this fiscal year, so we're really proud to maintain that. Finally, page 11, as I mentioned earlier, is a detailed description of every fund balance assignment the district has. Overall, again, we're anticipating about a $5.5 million decline in overall fund balance, but again, that's exclusively related to the building construction fund. Overall, we're anticipating a $5 million increase within the general fund. That's the end of my remarks, and I will turn it over to you, Chair Allenberg, for discussion.
Thank you very much, Director Woodard. Before I turn it over to the rest of the board, I just want to mention to the public that the board has seen this document and iterations of this document twice and had discussions at a work session last week and discussed it earlier at a work session. And then I also wanted to mention that we have a special meeting on June 20th where the budget will be coming up for a vote. And so as Director Woodard mentioned, that you can see these documents in multiple places if you're interested. I will turn it over to board members for questions or comments. Director Bergman?
Well, I think I just want to reiterate what we talked about in the work session this evening, that this particular presentation is an excellent, excellent document for anybody in the community who wants to understand how public education is funded, how it's designed, the different funds that are then there, and then how the district and Director Woodard are managing our finances effectively. I wanted to appreciate that and then encourage anyone who is watching that this is the type of you really want to pay attention to. It's very informative as to what's going on and the health of our financial picture here in the district. So thank you.
I just wanted to add to maybe Director Woodard, you could talk just a little bit about the importance of maintaining a healthy fund balance and maybe some of the times that we've heard, say from Moody's, that it is an important thing that we as a district start looking at, and maybe what some of the ramifications are if this was something that we didn't address right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Director Shaw. A fund balance can be viewed most basically as a savings account. And savings accounts are typically used for unforeseen circumstances, be it global pandemics, unexpected enrollment declines, unexpected increases to enrollment, and the need to add additional sections. We've had a number of bubbles roll through the district in various years, and so to open up a new classroom and add a new teacher or paraprofessional, that requires funding. Also, the district on a bi-monthly basis pays its employees promptly and on time, and to do that you need money in the bank account, as the state revenue and how that's paid out is not in a linear fashion. There are times in the year where we receive a lot of money and other times where we don't receive a lot of money due to timing and tax receipts and other moving parts. And so having a fund balance for cash flow purposes, which the school board also has in policy, is also very helpful. Were we to see a precipitous decline to our fund balance, Moody's would then rate our debt as more risky, more chance of us not repaying those bonds over the life of those bonds. And so that would, in effect, cause additional debt issued in the future to come at a more costly basis to taxpayers, which is something we want to avoid. We want to minimize that impact as much as possible. There's also the prestige factor in losing that rating.
Thank you.
Director Gabler?
Thank you for this report. I think one of the things that I think is important as we look over this budget, it's been less than a month since the legislative session finished, and Director Woodard, you talked about how we've talked as a board when we've had a chance to see this, how that money at this point will be going into our general fund. And I think it's important as community members, if you're watching in the news, it looks like, and we received historic funding, but it is going to take time for us to better understand. You mentioned it tonight, but I think it's worth mentioning again, some of the other mandates that came out of that. And so we're still wrapping our head around it. Your team has been working feverishly to get a better understanding of what this looks like. So for people that might be thinking, well, come fall, I'm going to see all sorts of changes. The reality is that it is going to take us some time. We have some rebuilding to do in our savings account. And so I appreciate you bringing that up tonight and just wanted to make sure that that is very clear that we won't really know the ramifications of this legislative session for a while.
Absolutely, Director Gabler, you kind of hit the nail on the head. The administration did its work and kind of ignored what was going on at the Capitol, so we were prepared to present a structurally balanced budget regardless of what happened. So any additional funds are kind of a bonus at this point. We'll determine what we do as we better understand those additional expenditures, as the board provides strategic direction. Again, every additional expenditure that's added to the district needs to be maintained in the following years. And so we want to make sure that if there are enhancements, that they'll be maintained and that we can see a return on investment over the years to come. Also, it's important to note that the additional funding is going to allow us to maintain our existing programs. One of the new revenue categories that was added by the state is $16.11 per pupil unit addition for media specialists or media library aid. We are proud to have a media specialist in all of our schools. That's something that not many districts have. So we're in a good place to maintain some already excellent programming as well.
Great. As Director Gabler mentioned, it's only been a month since you got a lot of this information, so I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you've done in bringing this forward. I know it's been a ton of work, so I appreciate it, and it's outstanding. So thank you to you and Dr. Stanley. Anything else? Great. Thank you very much. Our next discussion item is our comprehensive literacy plan celebrations. We have Director of Teaching and Learning, Jody St. Hubert here.
Hey, good evening, Chair Ellenberg, Dr. Stanley, board members, colleagues, and community members. It's exciting to be here in front of you with this report tonight. It's opportunities to celebrate the success of our students this school year due to their hard work, our teachers and our staff's hard work, and the strong partnerships with families. So I want to make a couple of comments before we jump right into the report. One is that I want to acknowledge that the celebrations in the report are directly connected to our early learning through 12th grade comprehensive literacy plan. There are several action steps that are outlined in the slide presentation that have actively been in place. And as you all know, there are many more that are being put in place and continue to grow in our multi-year plan with the comprehensive literacy plan. I also want to point out that this is a celebration specifically of one data point. It's of our FastBridge data, which is our universal screener, and that I want to just again point out that it is important that as we look at data, that we are always looking at the broad picture of multiple data points and lean into our data metrics plan for that comprehensive view. And with that, though, this is really quick, efficient data for us to get and share with you here tonight. So I'll move on to our next slide, please. This really highlights some of the action steps that I alluded to that are currently strongly in place with our comprehensive literacy plan. One thing that I think we often don't get in front of you enough is the work of our Early Learning Center, and I was excited to be able to highlight some of the data that they shared as well. They had at least 10 staff engaging in letters and lots of PD around that, but also strong collaboration and implementation in their classrooms. And this was also year one of a literacy curriculum that they were implementing, which is something that's new, that they've had a curriculum that aligns with their assessment metrics and their collaboration around PD. So it's exciting, and that's one specific point there that I'll highlight. And we can move on to the next slide. I did mention that these celebrations are one data point. FastBridge is a universal screener, which we often in education liken to going into the doctor and having that those initial screeners from the doctor in order to kind of find out where we're at and give us an indication if we need to dig a little deeper. The other thing about FastBridge literacy is that it does allow us to go deeper and give us what we call in education more diagnostic. And so I'm excited, as in our future slides here, to break down the elements of FastBridge and really show you and the audience that's listening how FastBridge is very comprehensive in the information that it gives us, aligned with the 5 pillars of literacy, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is our early literacy data. It looks a little bit different than the rest of the slides, but it aligns with their TS goals. And the percentage there of 94.06% of early learning 4-year-olds that are meeting or exceeding our literacy expectations in early learning at the end of the year is really remarkable. And it was fun to connect with Leah Bird last week and just look at this data as well as some other data points that she's digging into and celebrate around that. So we can move on to our next slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of slides, so I want to find a way to go through them in a rhythm here that isn't too redundant, but is also helpful and informative for everyone. I mentioned that FastBridge, all of what we have here on the slides are aligned with our assessment plan. So when we look at our assessment plan, there's a left-hand column that says FastBridge, and then there's a breakdown of what subtests in FastBridge each student gets at each grade level. And so our kindergarten is our early learning reading proficiency levels, and that really allows us to look at the beginning skills that students need in order to have their foundation to build on future literacy skills. And really exciting to see here the proficiency of our kindergartners in the early reading at 83% this spring. We can go on to the next slide. This is the same early reading, but it's first graders. So again, a subtest of FastBridge, where we're looking at foundational skills and the beginning things that our students need in order to build on their next components of reading. And here we have first graders at the FastBridge proficiency level in the spring at 72%. One thing you'll notice in a lot of the slides, we have the fall data and the spring data, and you also see the graphs. Some of us just like to read the numbers, some of us like to see the visual graphs, and so we tried to depict both visualizations in there for you. But what was really exciting for me, and this is highlighted in one of the last slides, is that most of the data points from the fall to spring data grew. Almost every single one grew. And I know it's sometimes hard to understand at what rate we were growing, right? We typically set goals in education from like a 3 to 5% change from a fall to a spring when we're looking at universal screening data. So I highlighted that as one of the data points in one of the last slides, that many of our data points are well above that 5% growth rate too. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So this is another subset of FastBridge. It's called a CBM, which is a fluency. And you'll see this is the only one that has a little bit of an anomaly as we continue to go through. You have a winter to a spring data point because our first graders aren't developmentally all ready for a fluency until they hit that winter part of first grade. So this is a winter to spring data. And although it's a winter to spring data, look at that growth in proficiency. It was 11% from the winter to the spring. And we can head on to the next slide, please. Okay. This is also a second grade fluency. So looking at the CBM, and here we have a fall to spring. So I just want to point out from here on forward, those fluencies and the couple grade levels that do them according to our assessment plan are fall to spring. And this is a 63% proficiency to 70% proficiency. So another one that's above that 5% that we just talked about in terms of a fall to spring data point. And we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, now looking at the second grade A reading. This is a longer test that the students sit down and take, usually is around the 30 to 40-minute range, depending on the class and how everything's going in terms of their first experiences with this. It is really selected on the student's grade and skill level, and the questions are related to all reading components. So we mentioned many different pieces with that. And this is a second grade data point across the district, from fall being at 64% to spring being at 76%. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide, please. We'll continue to go through grade levels, seeing these growth and looking at the different kinds of measure within FastBridge. This is fluency, proficiency from fall to spring, another great gain, 16%. All right, going on to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a third grade A reading, which is where they sit down and take that longer period of test on the computer. Another area where we had a 6% growth and proficiency from the fall to the spring. And now as we go on to the next slide, we have a fourth grade where there is a slight increase. And it's interesting when we look at all this data, it gives us more questions to ask and more to dig into. One thing that I think is really interesting is our fourth graders were the group of students that were those kindergartners in the spring of 2020. And so the interruption through just disruptions through COVID has uniquely hit them. This is the test that is specific to all of their skills. And the next one, on the next slide, is specific to the auto reading and the A reading are given together, but the auto reading breaks down their phonics and their phonemic awareness. So even in fourth grade, we are taking a very close look at those foundational literacy skills. And what's exciting here, even though we didn't see a huge gain with the last score of our fourth graders, is this was really a solid growth from the fall to the spring. And the kids don't even really know, the students don't even know they're taking a different test with these two. However, we like to break them down again to look at the different skills and where they're at and where we need to then instruct and respond to systems and PD, et cetera. So, and we can go on to the next slides with fifth grade. Pattern here where we have a reading and there's a solid 5% growth from fall to spring. And then in our next one, that's the auto reading. That is, again, breaking down those really basic foundational skills that are critical to the building blocks of all reading, and there's a nice growth and proficiency there. We also will move on to our middle school and our ninth grade data points from FastBridge, and we'll see here as we go through our middle school grades, there's a little bit more fluctuation of what we see in terms of from the fall to the spring. And there we can lean into that our secondary comprehensive literacy plan is not as far along as as our early learning one is, and our elementary one is in implementation. And we're excited about the things that the team in the middle school did this year that we can build on for next year. And there's some really strong highlights and celebrations specifically in 8th grade. So this is our 6th grade. And now you're going to see the pattern where there's A reading and auto reading. So here's our A reading, and we can go on to the next slide to see the auto reading. When we move on to 7th grade, same pattern where we say the A reading, and then also on the next slide, the auto reading, and then 8th grade, A reading and auto reading. And it is, I think, really exciting, even in the phase that we're at with the CLP in the secondary, to see that we have 8th graders making that strong of a growth from the fall to the spring, and that was really due to a lot of instructional matches that teachers leaned into in providing some going back to teaching those foundational skills in phonemic awareness and phonics. So then our 9th grade data has the same pattern where we have a reading with a nice solid growth and then auto reading. If we go to the next slide, we also just wanted to highlight some things that students said. We did a survey of our elementary students, and just we also did some informal conversations with them, but I included some of the data points here that are so important. We all know that we want our students to love reading and be readers for life for many, many reasons. So it's exciting to see that many of them are reporting enjoying independent reading time and also reading time at home. Okay. All right, we can go on to the next slide. One thing I want to celebrate, and looking back to some of those, I know we don't have them in front of us, but some of the middle school data points was, well, across the board data points, but it is specific in the 8th and 9th grade auto reading, is a goal that we have within multi-tiered systems of support, is that in the bottom layer, tier 1, that students are at 80% when we're looking at a universal screener. So if we kind of think back to all those slides that we just saw, we have a lot of pockets where we have universal screening data at 80%. That means that what we're doing in the core is meeting the needs of most of our kids. And then it's really critical that we look at the 20% or the whatever number that's falling outside of that. And that's a number that we can really respond to, right? It's a number that we can pull those kids and provide quick instructional matches, targeted interventions that might happen for only 6 weeks, and then we retest and we move them on. So to see that we had a lot of kids in a lot of those categories at above 80%, and that tier 1 is really a celebration that I wanted to point out. And there are many others listed there. I do think the auto reading one is also exciting to report, or just to really look at. We have as you are all well aware, we have a lot of staff, close to 100, I think it's 197 staff engaged in letters, and more starting this summer. So our 3rd grade teachers are starting this summer, and then we haven't had the opportunity to talk to you much about Aspire. Aspire is the upper grade version of letters, and we have 4th through 9th grade different pockets of digging into Aspire, but we have 4th through 5th grade teachers, 30 of them that will be starting Aspire this summer, and also our other secondary staff leading into it during the school year. So once we start all that training and continue to grow that, it'll be exciting just to see where else these data points take us, as well as the other triangulated data points that I mentioned. So next slide, please. So I kind of went into this one, talked mostly about our letters and the continued support of multi-tiered support systems. We also, we can go into the next slide, because this is one where I want to end. We also really need to recognize and celebrate the hard work of our teachers, our administrators. I didn't mention we have administrators and letters and the power of the learning in that, and then also in implementation and how they support teachers. It just truly makes a huge difference. So again, going back to our teachers who are learning something new and working together to implement in the classroom because they know our students deserve it. We really are just very grateful. They are making a difference for each and every Edina learner.
So exciting to see. Do board members have questions or comments? Dr. Green?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. DeSanti, for this is a fantastic report to you and your team and all the teachers. It's fantastic. I just had a question or an observation. Would it be fair to say that when you're looking at the growth in the middle school, like I noticed in the 7th grade auto reading proficiency level, we started at a higher level, right? And so when I look at that, like it just seems like there's just such a difference between 7th and 8th grade with where they're starting. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, or like, are we funneling more resources there, giving more support, or?
Yes, I think that's such a good question, because it shows us what we can do with universal screening data. We can look at it and then figure out ways that we do funnel more resources, give more support. We have our literacy coaches in the elementary school, and so they were able to really provide some job embedded support, which was not in place immediately at the middle school. So they worked through that and collaborated strongly with our department throughout the year, and there were pockets of teams that we were able to build that collaboration with more just because of systems. So it's absolutely an area where we have already some systems that we know we want to lean into for next year, so that there is more of the model of literacy coach support that there was at the elementary at the middle schools. Even though there's not a specific literacy coach, there's definitely coaches, and we'll be teaming closely with them to really model that format.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. It was just really interesting to looking at the growth that, some of the 6th grade, they're at 93%, which is just really exciting, and also really shows where we need more.
And we can learn from those pockets of celebration, right? And say, hey, what happened here, and how can we replicate that? So
great. Well, thank you.
Director Devil?
Yes, I thank you for the report. The celebration is incredible. There's just so much to be proud of. I just want to express gratitude on behalf of the board to you and your team, but to all of our teachers who are embracing new learning, who are putting in the time for professional development and working with our students. There's so much happening that I know we don't see on a daily basis, but the story is in the data that you're sharing. And I know it comes from a combination of their new learning, but also the depth of experience that our educators bring to all of our kids. Thank you. Director Shaw.
Yeah, I have actually a couple of questions for clarification. So one of them is the color coding. It looks like there's two colors of purple, but only one of them, one says low risk. Is the really light purple like no risk? I was trying to understand that first and foremost.
Yes, so the really light is no risk.
No
So
risk,
we would
okay.
maybe equate that to like excelling.
Okay.
Versus, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my
Very good.
question was, like, I am thrilled by what we're seeing at like the elementary schools. This is amazing. I started to get a little nervous seeing those 8th and 9th grade numbers. So 8th grade, 30%, you know, when I'm looking at the A reading, and then let me look at the auto reading was still at like 21% at risk. So those are our 8th graders going into 9th grade. So if you look at, you know, an average of those two numbers, we're talking at close to 200 students. And I started to think, well, what are we doing for those 200 students going into 9th grade? Or for our 9th graders going into 10th grade, that number was about 100 students. You know, kind of giving a number to the percent. I just wanted to make sure that we all understood, like, I'm so excited to celebrate the success, but I don't want to forget those students that are falling below that line. And maybe if you could talk about what we're doing to address that as they continue to process through the system.
Absolutely. I think where we're leaning in there and need to continue to build is with the continuation of the multi-tiered systems of support. We do have systems in place where we bring students to a collaborative team to talk about them if they are not meeting expectations and not really being successful where we would like to see them successful, and always tap into the strengths, right? So we need to continue to develop the strength of the collaboration in those meetings and the transfer of the conversations and the determinations of next steps to the classroom, into those student schedules, and to the next step. So we did put in, as you all know, the 9th grade class is a starting point, and now we need to continue, and there is a committee. It's a design group that's a middle school and secondary tier 2 and tier 3 support. So I talked about that tier 1 being the 80%, and then I was like, I visualize this through a pyramid. So then that next layer and the next layer are tier 2 and tier 3, and that team is continuing to talk about what do we need to put in place in order to make sure that those students aren't falling through the cracks. So we'll be excited to bring updates to you on that specifically next year.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like the 9th grade class that we voted to put into place has the capacity to address all of those 8th grade going into 9th grade students? I just, like, if I'm falling below that line, do I definitely have a spot somewhere in the high school that's going to address it and not just being put into a class?
So I think it will meet the needs of some of those students and many of them, right? But one, we don't have enough spots in the class for all of the numbers that you're looking at, and all of those numbers, they might need something different. And that's where the conversations around tier 2 and tier 3 happen, and where we need to lean in and continue to develop what we have in place. Because sometimes we can put a big group of students together who need something more based on a data point, and then we're maybe hitting the needs of some of them, which is great, but we're missing. It just can become so individualized, right?
I think my whole point is, as the summer unfolds and students are being placed in the classes, if I would hope you guys would come back to the board to say, hey, actually, we need this, right? Like, as we as a board are talking about opportunities to, you know, continue to fund what our students need and stuff like that.
And what's really exciting this year is we have the data. And so as kids are starting the year, we have it right off the bat, and we're able to lean into that with their counselors, with their families, with them as students who need to be empowered with the information about where they can grow. So it's exciting. We have the data, and we will be looking at that data for all those kids, and then continuing to develop what a good fit for them.
Dr. Gabler? Thank you for the report. I have a couple questions. how, if you had to make a prediction, how closely does Fastbridge, some of these great results we're seeing, when we get the MCA results at the end of the summer, do you anticipate that we will see this correlate?
I'm trying to think about our preliminary numbers. We're, all right.
I know,
I
but,
know.
but I guess my question is,
so
you know,
there
we see such great growth in this report, and I just, you know, if this is a great resource, which it seems to be,
So there,
we should see it in other
absolutely,
measures that we're using.
absolutely. And so the reason I paused, number one, there are correlation reports that are nationally normed from Fastbridge data to NCAs. So there absolutely will be strong correlations. I think the reason I paused is just because it's relative. Like this year, I bet we'll see a smaller correlation, but leaning into next year, yep, it will continue to grow, and I think we'll see a triangulation of data in all areas, MCAs as well as Fastbridge, as well as classroom data, for sure. Fastbridge truly, I don't know the exact data points or the exact research behind it, but they do have their data points to predict how students will do on MCAs.
Great, thank you. And yep, didn't expect you to
I'm
look
like,
at
I'm
your
not
crystal
sure
ball.
However, there is a strong correlation. That has run through statisticians, yes.
My second question here, when we see low risk, can you give us a percentage of that? Because I know in the past, one of the things that I've struggled with is 40% is what a student has to hit before intervention comes in. And to me, I would love to see, when we talk about each and every student, have a little bit of flexibility if we can, and maybe that is already in place, where we can say, this student is a 55%, but we know that that's not what their personal best is. Like, for instance, like certain kids would really benefit in that gray zone between where it's like they're scoring at that 40th to 65th, but they have to it's almost like we're waiting for them to go below it before some of those intervention models kick in. So my question on this is, when we say they're meeting proficiency, can you give me, like, what is that percentage?
I don't know if I can give you that percentage, but what I think I'm going to respond and see if one thing that is, so the key here and the terms, the low risk term is directly used from Fastbridge, and I just truly pulled that key. Greg and I were talking, and we've been talking as to what the language is important, that we're consistent, right? So when I say proficient in the boxes, it's truly that they're proficient. And we might, Karen, have students that are not in the high risk or some risk category in one subtask pop up in auto reading, right? Or we might see patterns now because our staff have been trained and are getting more PD all the time to look for what are some other signs and markers of students having reading challenges that fall outside of that low risk or some risk category. And then we have further assessments because of our training with letters to dig deeper and find out if there's just pockets of their learning progression that they somehow missed because maybe they had a ear infection on a given, unit or something.
So that is really encouraging to hear, because I think that exactly what you just said, where the teacher is like, you know what, this kid they're not at that 40th percentile, they're at this, but we're not seeing the growth, we're not seeing, there's certain, and we'd love to pull them in and give them some intervention. So thank you for that response. I'd encourage that to keep going. And then I promise my last one, you guys. Similar to what Director Shaw talked about, this literacy work is years of us, not us down at public school, educate them. And it is going to take a lot of work. And so as we look at building our budget, I think I would encourage our family and the team, that literacy coach position, I see it show up a couple times. That is such an imperative part. I happen to be perhaps in an elementary school that has never dug into data like we've been doing the last couple of years. That takes people, that takes that partnership with those literacy coaches. And so pushing at this. It's not going to fix itself in 1 year. This is brand new to everything we've heard. So just don't hesitate to let up because we're seeing some good results. Keep going. So that's a good opportunity for me just to continue to and fund and our partnership is truly that is to be possible right now. So I will just take on to that and take the opportunity to think about that partnership.
A couple quick questions. One, going off of that, was given your thinking of the teachers and recognizing this whole new way of approaching this, which is a huge thing for any professional person to have to then do. Do you feel, now that you've seen this, you've seen a little bit of this result, do you feel like they're leaning in more, or the people who haven't yet had the opportunity to go through the training and so on and so forth, there's a building momentum as we're talking about, keep going, keep pushing. Can you give me a sense of the feeling amongst who's already gone through it or he's been doing it for a couple of years because they started early, versus people who are not quite there? As we get to the middle and high school level, based on the data, give me a sense of where people are from their mind of engaging in this change. How would you articulate that?
Well, I can definitely speak to that. It's pretty incredible to me that we have teachers engaging in 100 plus hours of letter training, right? And the only questions we have right now are sometimes a little bit around communication and what are, when's my next training? But really the biggest communication is when can I start the next unit? When can we jump in? Fourth and fifth grade teachers, some of them are saying, can we do letters and clear? Just lots of asks to continue to engage. Data, I do want to highlight Assistant Director Bethany Van Osdo, who is key player in all this work. She gets out emails to every team highlighting celebrations of the data. And so that was, this was end of the year, the celebrations were end of the year. We got good email responses back in terms of this has been hard work, but good work. I think into your question in the fall be really important.
Great. That leads me to my second question, which is, if for those individual students that were identified still in the risk category for another grade level, and you were starting to talk about it a little bit, but I'm trying to go from now the parent point of view. We saw the FastBridge information coming through the site and so forth, and I'm wondering, wow, how are we going to proactively, whoever they're, my daughter, for example, 6th grade now going to 7th grade. From a 7th grade teacher, whoever that's going to be is going to get their data. How are they going and be proactive and thinking, okay, here's how I need to approach this particular student based off of what I've got here. Is there any, not in a high level, just in a high level way, from a parental standpoint, how is this data going to be used, especially for the next grade level that they're coming? Because that teacher hasn't had this child before.
Right.
Here's what it is, and how are they going to approach that? And more importantly, when would the parent then have a sense of what the plan is related to, especially if you saw my kids in a risk category?
Right. So not only will we have spring data for teachers to look at, but we'll also gather fall data really quickly. And so they'll have both data points in order to really get a whole picture of where the student is after summer. And we continue to work as a team on how are we being clear and consistent with communication with families, and how are we continue to lean into different supports, whether it's a literacy coach or our department, in order to team with teachers on the best ways to respond. The one thing about FastBridge with literacy as well is that it not only provides strong data points, but it also gives you some places to start for that instructional math, right? And if it doesn't, teachers now know who they should be reaching out into buildings or at our office to say, hey, I need some help on what I see with this data.
Excellent. And then my last question is really about, we're seeing from the grade level, the aggregate, but clearly different buildings are going to have different results based off what's in there. So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm curious just to hear you say it, is that if we then saw at a particular grade level, but at different sites, there was more range, let's say, of the upper and the lower component, are we able to then direct more literacy coaching or other elements to those areas, especially while we're tracking that grade level at that site?
Absolutely. And that's part of the admin letters training is that you get content and then you get an implementation plan. And so as we continue to lean into helping our instructional leaders and our administration and our administrative deans in the buildings, that's really critical because they are engaging in the conversations with their teachers. We're always there as a support and a partner, and yet the empowerment of that building being able to adjust and flow based on the data is critical.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Exciting.
Thank you.
Exciting progress. Appreciate all your work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the Raptor Visitor Management System. We have Director of Media and Technology Services, Natasha Monsas Daly. Did I do the last name correct? All right.
Welcome. Good evening, Chair Ellenberg, Dr. Stanley, and members of the board. We're here tonight to talk about Raptor Visitor Management System, and I put together a report for you, but I understand we want to discuss some things, so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. As you know, we are working really hard to continue what we call a multi-layered level to security, to physical security. There's not one system or not one tool that's going to solve all security issues. And implementing Raptor in our buildings will be an additional step in that process. The two things that Raptor really gives us that's really important is one, who gets access to the building, but also who is in the building and accounting for those individuals in the event of a crisis. And so Raptor Visitor Management would be something that when an individual enters the building, they scan their ID, and there's multiple forms of ID that are accepted. And Raptor pulls against the National Sex Offender Registry, as well as any flags that we have in our student information system when you think of things like custodial agreements, court orders, those kinds of things. And then a flag pops up, and our buildings will be able to deal with that appropriately in terms of allowing that person access to our buildings. Raptor does not share any personal data, so that information that's scanned in that system is really just for that singular moment. A badge gets printed out with the individual's picture on it, which will also help us and allow us to work with our students in making sure that they're paying attention to who's in their buildings as well. They'll be able to visibly see that badge with the picture of the individual on it. At this point, I think it'd probably be easier to open up to questions, but I can keep talking if you'd like.
You're welcome to talk as long as it's lovely to hear from you.
I know, it's been a while and there's no one here to enjoy this moment, so that's sad.
Director Bergman?
I just want to make a comment that District 287, I think, implemented this a year or two ago after their incident that they had at the South Education Center, and it has been a wonderful program to help manage all their different sites and knowing exactly who's in that building and who's not. So from that experience that I've seen, I certainly see the great value of this type of program for Edina. So I'm glad that we're pushing that forward.
And we're one of, few districts that don't have something of this nature yet, and so I think it's really just the next step for us, next evolution.
Director Shaw?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, kind of just give me an idea, paint a picture of what the system actually looks like? Is this like an app? Is this a device that will sit on the counter? Is it printing out stickers? I'm just thinking through, like, from a workforce management perspective, how this will impact our sites as well. I think it's a fabulous idea. I just want to kind of get a full rounded picture of it.
Yeah, so there are two hardware pieces to it. It's about this big, I guess, for those who can see, where the visitor would scan their ID, and that just sits on it can sit on a desk, it can sit on a table, it's pretty mobile, so there's multiple options. And then next to that is the badge scanner, which looks a lot like a receipt printer. So it's a very small piece, and it prints out the badge. So they're two really pretty small things that are mobile, so that we could say, well, it makes in this building, it makes sense on this desk, or in this building, it makes sense in this vestibule. And then the office staff have the software on their desktop computer, and so then they just see it and approve those badges or allow those individuals in from the software on their desktop.
Great,
so the footprint of it is pretty small.
That was my question: how much interaction with the staff does the system need? So
pretty minimal.
Okay.
Obviously, unless there's an incident, which would happen regardless of whether or not we have Raptor.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Director Green.
Thank you. Thanks for this.
Yep.
It's great to look at and great to see kind of that multi-level and the way we're thinking. I have two questions.
Yep.
One is I'm a little concerned about staff support in the event that someone is turned away. I don't know how often we deal with that at the school now, but I know that our front office staff have a lot that they're managing. A lot of times there's kids there getting picked up from the nurse. So like, what is our plan to support staff in the event that someone coming to visit, a grandparent coming to visit see their student perform, their grandchild, and they get turned away? What happens?
So truthfully, it's really no different than what we have right now, in the sense that right now, what an office staff actually has to do is look up the grandparent in campus, figure out if they have a flag or a custodial agreement or whatever other method they use at the school, and then determine that that individual can't be in the building. So this is just a quicker way of doing that. And one of the things that I'm working with building principals, and I also met with office staff as we talked about just even implementing this, is what are those specific policies and or protocols and procedures that are needed in the building. So in some buildings, the office staff have indicated they already are turning away people if need be, and turning away sounds so awful, but you know what I mean. Turning away people if need be, and they feel comfortable continuing to do that. In other buildings, we're adopting procedures so that they can alert a principal, a dean, someone else that would actually then handle the conversation with the family, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a family member, but the community member.
And this is for any person who goes into the building at all?
Any person that is not a staff.
That is not a staff. And is that true for if they're on the premise of the school, or is just inside the school
Inside
facility?
the school building, yep.
Okay, but if they came to outside to a class party, they would not have to get scanned to go in and be in on the, okay.
Yep.
I get, okay.
Class parties and large events will be handled as they currently handle it in their school buildings right now. So we're not changing that practice. We're changing the practice of when an individual needs to enter a building and to go into a specific space.
Okay. I'm not totally understanding, to be honest, because logistically, I think there are, when you have the, I'm trying to think of, I don't know, graduation,
yep.
Any of the 5th grade graduations. So there are so many people that come through. Sometimes they're in for a minute, sometimes they're in, they stay. I didn't know that our staff currently were already taking names and doing background kind of look at that.
Generally what they do in those kinds of events, they don't. Generally what they do is it's a sign up sheet, a piece of paper.
But this would be in place for those events?
Not for a large scale event. Otherwise you'd be holding up the entire large scale event.
Was that in here, this report?
No, that was one of my questions actually, was how are we going to handle large events? And I think what you're saying is this system won't be utilized.
This system is basically for volunteers that go into the building, in a way.
In a way, yeah. Volunteers, contractors, pretty much, yeah. Meetings, yes.
Okay.
PTO.
That's great. That helps me tremendously, because I really was thinking like, how would that actually look? So, okay, thank you.
Yep. I thought you said you had 2 questions.
Director Neville?
My question is similar to Director Green's question, and you answered part of it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When it becomes necessary to not allow entrance to a site, you mentioned that staff currently does have a way of handling it and that there are some protocols available. Do we currently have any staff trained or protocol for de-escalation techniques? So that it's that bridge between we end up with a situation, it's starting, someone's becoming dysregulated, they're not happy with the response. We don't need to contact law enforcement, but there's room for de-escalation. And I know that that is a skill, and it's a skill that can be trained. Is that part of our protocol or training anywhere within the district?
So it's not currently a part of our protocol specifically with the individuals you're probably some of the individuals you're probably talking about. But with our administrators or principals, that will be a part of, that is going to be, and it has already been in some instances, a part of their training around de-escalation techniques. It's also a part of, obviously, our SROs in the buildings, de-escalation. Our front office staff is where we're going to probably have to do some different, think about some things differently. And that's why it's going to be building specific about how they want to handle those incidences as they occur.
Thank you. I mean, and I appreciate that we do have staff who are available as a resource.
Absolutely. And
Should we
that's
need
part
to
of-
call on them? But I agree with expanding and would encourage expanding the training where it's possible, where we have the capacity to build in that professional development and training. I think there's, and this is partly my experience with 287 as well, is there is so much value there, and it de-escalates. It's exactly what it says it does, and it just provides a lot of saving of face, saving of anything moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, that's really part of what we're developing, is that piece of like the training, the protocols, and the procedures to make it really clear about how we handle those in each building. Yeah.
Director Bergman? Really quick clarifying question. As you talk about processes, new processes, is it our intention to then, if an individual was in a building and didn't have that badge sticker on them, what are we expecting of both staff and, if necessary, students, depending on what we're asking for? That we'd want to at least call something out to say, hey, I see something, say something, kind of thing. Is that part of the process that we're talking about developing?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing about this is going to be consistency, right? And so once we put this in place and once we establish those procedures and protocols, it is going to be about consistency. There should be no reason that then someone is in the building should those things be followed. But yes, that's what we want to help our students to understand, is see something, say something, as well as other staff members, right? And so that's all a part of it.
A couple quick questions. One is, you mentioned this would be for the school day. Does that include Kids Club?
So that's one of the things that Anne Marie and I have been working really
Okay.
closely on, and we've also talked with Paul McCullough on this. Right now, at this very moment, it will be during our school day from
Okay.
8 to 4, but as we continue to revamp our inside and exit procedures for Kids Club and all of our after-school programming, not just after-school programming, but any events,
Right.
this will be part of that conversation.
Okay. And then you had mentioned a clarifying question. You had mentioned that this will be utilized only for people entering the building, but it can also flag like custodial issues. Would this be used at all for people picking up children, or is it
Both.
both?
Right. The biggest thing is we want to understand who's in our building,
Okay.
right? But also when a family member or even a friend comes to pick up a child, we can use this in that same exact way.
Okay. And then from a rollout perspective, I'm sure there's best practice about how other districts have done it. Is it recommended that we inform the public and we tell people, come and scan your ID and have like a mass scanning, like, so we don't do it as people are entering the building? Like, if you plan on entering our building at some time in the next school year, we want you to come and scan your ID, or do we basically do it as people come? Does that make sense?
Yep, it makes perfect sense. One of the things that we've talked about doing is having the opportunity for families to do it during a Get Connected or an open house day for the purposes of practicing it, not because it makes it any faster. It's a really quick system. So if someone comes in mid-year and they decide to scan their ID at that point, they'll be just fine. But we do think that it would be great for the community as we continue to communicate this, which I will partner with Daphne on, but we wanted to wait till we brought this to the board. But as we want people to have an opportunity to try it, right? To see what it looks like, to understand the process, to know what's going to happen when they enter the building for their children at any point.
Can I clarify something?
Sure.
Erica just said, so you were talking about like they would get their ID scanned and then it would be good for the year. Is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
and then yes.
So you only have to scan your ID once in Raptor, and after that, let's say you came to the building, right? And you've scanned your ID, you're in the system, and now the badge will be printed for you. You come back a month later, theoretically, we could type your name, your picture will pop up, we'll be able to print the badge and give it to you.
Got it. Okay.
My only last question is, I love this. I love our focus on security. I think it's one of the most important things that we do, if not the most important thing that we do. I think it's a phenomenal idea to show people how it works at Get Connected Day and things such as that. My only concern is making sure that our staff is trained and are comfortable with the system before parents start utilizing it.
Absolutely.
And I'm a little concerned with if those things are going to converge at the same time,
We actually plan to do a soft launch
Okay.
beforehand so that
Perfect.
we can get practice with the system, understand what it looks like when someone comes in. We probably won't be able to have any flags just because I don't think we have personnel in the building. Hopefully we don't already have staff entering the building that we practice with, that we have flags. But yes, we're gonna do soft launch, then kind of roll it into hopefully that get connected open house kind of look, and then have it ready for the first day of school.
That's great. And then from a process perspective, I believe this is coming for action at our June 20th meeting because there's a price differential if we vote on it in the month of June. So I just wanted to let the board know that from a procedural perspective, correct?
Yes, we would
Okay.
like to get this approved before July 1
Okay.
to make certain that we have the best price.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question,
have-
Erica.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's go.
Sorry. Oh, there's two more questions
two
down
more
at this
questions,
end.
yeah.
I'm sorry. I was
I
focusing
was
on
done
myself
here,
and
Yeah,
not,
exactly.
not this end. Yes, I
I know.
know. It's very exciting.
Two questions about the monitoring and alerting process. Is it centrally monitored, like from the district, like, or is it just building by building? And then secondly, what's like the alert process like? So let's say somebody does come to the door and they are a registered sex offender. Like, does it go to the administrator? Does it go directly to the SRO? Does it go to the district? You know, I'm just trying to figure out what the triage piece of it is.
Basically all of the above to your questions. So first of all, it is monitored at the building level. That's the primary place to monitor it, but we can also monitor at the district level. And then the alert is set up much like our current alerting system, in which we give access to the people that are requested at the building. Not generally, I should say, oftentimes it's members of the BERT team, but think your administrators, SRO, a dean, those people would get access to that alert when an individual or when an alert pops up on that system. So it's never just one person that knows that it's happening at that moment. We would also get a notification in the district office.
And then one real quick follow-up question. If somebody does log in at the beginning of the year, and let's say there's a change of custodial agreements throughout the year, who's responsible for making that change within the system? Is that the prevailing custodial parent that has to alert and say that this person's no longer doing that, or is that all procedural piece?
Generally, that's how it works. And then that gets, our building generally can update that in campus, but oftentimes our enrollment team often updates that in campus as well.
I also wanted to weigh in with some questions here. No. I have had a chance to use this system in other districts years ago, so I'm excited that we're doing this. One thing, question I have, does it reset at the end of the year? So like if I scan at Highlands in September, do I never have to scan again? Am I in the system could I come back 15 years later and I'm still in the system?
You know, that's a really good question. I don't know what the statute is or the time frame. I don't think it's 15 years. I don't think you get that much time. But one of the things we would probably do is just when we do our standard end of the year reset is that we'd make sure that we're resetting.
Everybody resets. So parents would know that starting in September again, I rescan and I.
Yep.
Okay.
And the nice thing is really if you're a parent or a guardian, it's a lot easier. If you're already connected to a kid in campus, that will actually already be in Raptor. So it's a pretty straightforward process for someone that's already connected to a student in the district.
And having used this system, it is once you've used it once, it is so slick and it's so quick, and it does give the peace of mind of knowing who's in our building, because it is kind of archaic that we have a paper pencil system right now.
Well, and you think in the event of a crisis, when we have
You
to
know
get
who's
people
in your
out of the
buildings.
building,
Yes.
we actually know who those people are, and not only that, we know where they are in our buildings, and so it gives us a better sense of that.
And the other thing I wanted to say is it's great at tracking volunteer hours, because you can pull that out and you can say, I know that Janie Shaw has been in our buildings for 25 hours a month for the last, so that's sometimes interesting. I've seen that it used that way too. So, okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. See you in a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Next up on our agenda is the framework for secondary language arts courses and resource recommendations with Director of Teaching and Learning, Jody D. St. Hubert again.
Okay, good evening again, Chair Allenberg, Dr. Stanley, board members. In front of you today is the framework for secondary ELA course and resource recommendations, primarily guiding change documents for each structure, ELA course, and resource recommendations, as well as a timeline. This report was brought to the board for a board workshop discussion in May, and the changes that we put in place are highlighted in green, and that's from the feedback from the board discussion. So at this point, I'll just open it up to questions and further feedback and questions.
Board member questions? Director Shaw?
Yep, thank you, Jody, for this. I've read this probably 10 times today. Just making sure, like in my mind, I'm like, everything's here. And there was one thing that kept popping back up to me that I just felt like I wasn't seeing it. And it was addressing meeting the students' style of learning, if that makes sense. So, do we have taking our multi-tiered system of supports out, but if we're just focusing on the fact that we have students that learn in different ways, like I felt like we've talked about that in other ways, but I didn't see it reflected here. So does the course meet different styles of learning, and do the resources meet different styles of learning? I looked at a couple of our neighboring districts and felt like the reflection of course offerings sometimes addressed not only like student sparks, right? Like, especially when it comes to reading, like there's a course that addresses, I'm a struggling reader, but it turns out I'm an amazing reader when it comes to like superhero graphic novels, right? And there's districts that are actually really tailoring things like that to students. So that was the piece that I felt like I wasn't seeing or feeling.
Yep.
So I just wanted to share
That's
that
good
feedback.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Any other board members? Oh. Director Green?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you for incorporating the feedback from our last meeting in here. So I think it represented our discussion well. So thank you for doing that.
Great. Look at that. Great job incorporating the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next discussion, Legislative Action Committee 2023-2024 recommendations. We have the LAC team led by Julie Green.
Thank you, Chair Allenberg. I will make this pretty quick. We have the LAC kind of wrap up memo from what took place over the whole year. As you guys recall, there was a mid-session update that was pretty detailed with what the activities were that was sent to the board, I think, in February. Since then, really the big things is that we did have the Capitol Day and some additional follow-up from that. And then, of course, the end of the session where we were really, really busy. And then last week, the LAC hosted a session recap, and I'm going to pass it to Director Shaw for a moment to just give an update on how that went.
Thanks. We did a session summary. It was fantastic. We had community members attend. We had some staff members there. Director Woodard and Dr. Stanley and Director Saylor did an amazing job of sharing with us some of the implications, both from a policy perspective, as well as the financial impact that the recent legislation was going to have, or could possibly have, I should say, on Edina Public Schools. We had our students there to present, and they are amazing every single time they speak. It's very exciting. We actually had community members comment and hope that they could continue this leadership opportunity. So that was really fun to see. So we did record the session for people to see, and our hope is to have it uploaded onto the website. We had some technical difficulties with the recording that they're working through. They're actually trying to blend two recordings together. So one half from one half of the cassette tape and the other half from the other half of the cassette tape is what it feels like. So as soon as that is done, we will share that out with the community.
Great, thank you, Director Shaw. So this next part that I want to talk about is this will come up for action for the board. There are 3 pieces to this action item. One is the 2023-2024 committee members. We had a lot of applications. We did interviews. And we have landed on having 15, you can believe it, 15 students, 3 community members, and then, of course, Director Aram and Director Shaw and myself continuing on the LAC plus our administration support as well, which is great. So that is a recommendation. I recommend all of them. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, but it is a fantastic whip smart group. That's how I would describe them.
Yeah,
So
we were
could,
pretty blown away.
yeah, we probably could just put them on a bus, send them to the Capitol, and they'd fix a lot of things for us. So anyway, so that is that committee recommendation. The other thing that is in there is we did take a look at the bylaws, which we had put in our original plan, our 3-year plan, to really look at those bylaws to make sure they were lining up with the work that was going on. We made a couple tweaks. So that is something that we'll ask for you to vote on. And then wherever we land on the bylaws, we will then pull into board policy, board committee work, because some of it crosses over. And then the third thing is just the plan for next year. So really, we are up and running. And really, it is our goal next year is to focus on longevity, structure, systems. We're asking for a slight increase in our budget from $250 to $1,000, which is actually probably more in line with what we spent this year on different things. I mean, that would cover transportation, types of things like that for advocacy work. So I don't know if any board members have any questions or if you want to add anything. No. Any questions?
I have a question just about the bylaws, because I haven't had the opportunity to begin the work with the LAC. So I was curious if the bylaws have had the opportunity for review with our legal counsel or AMSD.
They were back when they were first put together, I think in 2018. They were put together. We looked at them again and passed them a year and a half ago, I think.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't remember. It's on there, the exact date. And really the changes that we made were more just the structural ones for this one, the tweaks that were made with the committee members. But yes, they were looked at originally.
Okay. The questions I have just in reading through them, curious if, and we don't have to answer this now, but if there was conversation about adding information about a conflict of interest paragraph, which is just standard stuff for bylaws. So having conflict of interest, indemnification, removal of committee members. I did not see listed in this set of bylaws. And so, and if it is addressed to, just let me know. I'll go back and that's fine.
I'll go back and look, Regina, but I thought we do have that in there, and maybe it's in the agreement.
So it may be in a different
I think it's
space.
so all the LAC members sign an agreement to say, I am going to participate in that. We had no changes to that, but there is information about conflict of interest. I know for sure, but I can send that to you or point you in that direction.
Oh, that'd be helpful. I think
where that is.
Yep. And then the indemnification, I think, is just good standard language, but would appreciate a legal review to say yes or no.
Yeah, that agreement was put together before my time as a chair, but I know that they did look at, they did use legal review.
Okay.
So I'll send that along to you and you can take a look at it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great.
I only have, sorry, I don't have a question, it's a comment.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I just wanted to thank Julie and the rest of the LAC team for all the work that they've done. It's been a lot of work and I really appreciate it. You've done an outstanding job this year. My only question / concern is because you guys did so much work, it was a lot of hours, and now you're adding a lot more students, is the sustainability of all the work. And if other board members are going to want to put as many hours in as you did.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I look at this as I think we had a little bit of a skeleton crew, which was done on purpose for year 2. It just so happened that everything was going bonkers down in St. Paul. And so that I think drove a lot of the extra work. But our goal is to make sure that it's sustainable. And I actually think the bigger group of students will help us.
Okay.
So I do think that having at least 2, if not 3 board members on there to help do that. But we we really worked out a lot of kinks. I think a lot of that extra work this year was figuring out how we were going to do this. And the budget this year, the capital. I mean, I don't know. I think that was probably 50% of the work that added to it. But I think one of our goals is to make sure, this is what's in that plan, is to make sure that we're sustainable. Because no matter if no one here is on the board again, or in 10 years, I want that LSC to be set so that this is what we do, which I think having Polly Bowles, I know she's not here, but that will help that longevity, I think, moving forward. So, but I am fully aware and don't want this to become something that overwhelms the board, but I do know it's a priority, and maybe it's something we talk about at the retreat. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I want to echo what Julie is saying, because I think this year they spent a lot of time basically writing the playbook. So that moving forward, there isn't, this was a reinvention of the wheel a little bit, right? But the playbook is being written. And the fact that we have different ages of students, right? We were intentional in that too, so that they're not students that are, on for a year rolling off, right? Like, what age of parents did, came and talked to us, right? There was a lot of intentionality behind that for that exact reason. So
I guess my only comment / advice is when you're looking towards the plan for next year is how can we utilize committee members and Polly to extricate board members from as much of the day-to-day work and provide guidance and strategic direction. So board members can come in and provide that direction and not provide as much management and day-to-day work.
100% I am behind that. Yep. And I think it's also growing the partnership with administration on this. But I agree with you 100,000%. So,
but outstanding job, and
yeah.
Thank
well,
you,
and the
all
other
of you
thing
guys.
that's in the plan that I didn't mention is that we do have a intern volunteer who is giving us 120 hours this summer, a college student, and so I have him doing a lot of pre-work, including putting together like a little bit of a training manual. So like, this is what happens when we go in, and kind of get us that kind of structure. So, and working with Polly on that too. So
that's great.
Yep.
Anything else? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I think it might have been left on, but I mean, Janie and Julie covered a lot of it. I think the other part about it too is that when we interviewed the parents this term, I think we had a little bit of a different angle about like what we were looking for from people, so that we had somebody who could we knew what we needed from people, and so we interviewed for that.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Okay. Our next discussion item, our liaison recommendation for the 2023-2024 school year from the governance committee. This was discussed at the April 25th work session and again at a work session in May. And what this document contains is the feedback from the board. In this document, the one thing I do want to note is that the biggest area of discussion, I believe, at the last work session was about dissolving the city committee and putting that in the governance committee. And since we didn't have clear direction, I left it as it was, but I just wanted to point out that the direction was for the board to think about that and come back to this meeting with some recommendations about what they would like to do with that piece. So that's the first document. Then the second document is what this would then look like as we normally sign up for liaison roles. So that's the second document. From a procedural / process perspective, the first document would go for approval to the board in July, and then at a July work session, we would discuss the board members in their roles in that Excel document. And then at an August regular meeting, we would approve board members in their new roles. Given that, do other members of the governance committee have any comments about the documents themselves or anything else? So I welcome feedback about the document, and then also specifically any feedback anyone has about the city committee, and if we should leave that as a standing committee or if that should be dissolved into the governance committee. I don't have a strong opinion either way, in case anyone's wondering. So.
I have been thinking about that question. I actually think we should leave it how it is because I think there was a lot of, I've been thinking about having our treasurer on that committee, I think is really important. So the way that we're set up right now, Director Shaw is on there, and so I think we leave it as is. Now, that's what my thought is.
Do people just want to comment on that one specific point really fast, and then we can move on to any other general comments, just so I can make sure I have a clear understanding?
Well, I'll just repeat a comment that I shared during our discussion on the city council. I think there's 2 levels of engagement with the board in the city, and I think at one level, it's important for the full board to have some face time with the city. And it's similar to the state of the city, state of the school board, which is a more formal gathering for the community. And maybe that is it. Maybe there's some way that we formulate that to be that particular level of engagement. But it's just recognizing the partnership and the value, the importance of both of these entities, the school board and the city council, that overlaps with the majority of the families we serve. But on a issue to issue basis, I think, things come up, and right now we're talking about elections and what that will look like. It makes sense that that's just a working group, and I don't have a preference either way. I think that the group you put together, if we determine the treasurer is a significant individual board member to have on there, great, and maybe +2, just something to spread out the workload between all of the board members so it doesn't all fall just on the governance committee.
Anyone else?
I don't really have strong feelings either way. I know when we discussed it, I was kind of going through some hypothesis. If we can give ourselves some flexibility with that, in case we have a board where it seems like a good idea, they have a certain skill set. Maybe it's development. We're talking about, purchasing a property or something like that. So not keeping it so narrow, I think is how I would lean on this. But again, I can also see the benefit of keeping it in governance just because it doesn't create additional, kind of streamlines it a little bit. So I don't have strong feelings one way or the other, but I think allowing some flexibility for future boards might be.
So are you guys comfortable to leave it as it is with chair, treasurer, one other board member, but also knowing, and we can even write it down, that there's flexibility if issues come up, one of the individuals can pop off at any given time, and someone can come on if they have institutional knowledge that is needed for a particular issue.
I would basically just say that I don't think there's necessarily a need for any one particular role on the board that needs to be on there. The treasurer, as people have said, that's important. I'm less concerned about that. I think it's more of keep the flexibility overall for what the workload is to make that happen, to go from there. But I would support whatever the majority would like to do.
Great. Okay, now we'll move into more general comments. Sorry, I started specific, but I just wanted to get that. Does anyone? Oh,
I can just make a comment
yes.
I made when we first discussed this. I like it. I think it's great. I think we've identified a problem, and I like the fact that we are reevaluating. We're trying some things, and we'll be reevaluating, and we're doing it in a timely manner so that we can let those groups that we do represent kind of know about some of these changes. So I appreciate the group that worked together to make this happen.
Director Shaw.
I echo those same sentiments, so thank you. Are we commenting on the second document first as part of this?
Either one is fine.
Okay.
Yep.
So my only thing I was going to say is there are 3 of us who our terms are up or would be up for reelection. my question is, should we flip the three of us to be the beginning of the year for the PLC so that
That makes sense.
so that
Yep.
also gives an opportunity if there are new board members that they would not be rolling right into that. So
Yep.
that was just the only thing that caught my eye since all three of us are in the second half of
Yep.
the year.
Let me write that down. Any other comments?
Just a thought that I had as something to kind of keep in mind, and I don't think it warrants a change, but historically, we have not had representatives at sites where they had children.
Yes.
And I think with our current board, that won't be a problem, but down the road, it could be an issue where because we've consolidated
Yep.
that, if we have a lot of elementary or
Mhm.
board members with a lot of elementary, but it's not a problem at this point, and since we're trying this, I think it doesn't need a change.
Maybe I should put a notation though, that ideally X, Y, and Z. Just so, because it's not written down everywhere, it's just sort of, people say, okay, that's a good thing to note. Director Neville?
I just
Yep.
wanted to clarify items that we talked about in discussion, but in the event that there might be confusion with the community, just as all of it sits, and recommendation 1 with the site liaisons, as I reread this, I thought it could sound like there may not be a board rep coming to a site, but we're actually rotating every 3rd month. So just to clarify that board liaisons will visit sites in person, just on a different schedule than it was before. But I didn't want anyone to be concerned that we were going to lose that. I had another, let's see here. Oh, I just love recommendation number 2. I think it's a real benefit for our full board to be rotating everyone through PLC. And we had that discussion. It's a good one. Oh, recommendation 4, just a clarification that we're not dissolving the Minnesota High School League. It's just a liaison. So
Yeah.
just
Good
just a
catch.
clarification. In case anybody wondered, I know that was our intent and understanding, and we talked about it. And just a comment I'm on recommendation number, where are we? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, and they're repeating 1, 2, recommendations for equity and access. And I'll work on it. It was about clarity. And yes, I think clarity is important here. The meet and confer. So recommendations regarding meet and confer and the intention of the listening sessions. So we're talking about the listening sessions. I know I would still find it helpful to have some clarity around the intent of the listening sessions and how they compare with meet and confer, just so that we have some established expectations and understanding. I know we're still working through this.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Great. Thank you, everyone, for working through this with us. I'm excited about seeing how it works. Let's see. What's next on our agenda? Sorry, I was taking notes. Great. Next up are our policies, and I will turn it over to our policy chair, Regina Neville.
Thank you. And so we have several policies up for discussion this evening. Policy 111, equity and educational achievement. 113 regarding data requests. 414 and 415, which we will clarify. They had been combined as one policy on the board a while ago, and recommendation of Sonia Saylor to divide into 2, which we will talk about, and policy 806, emergency management. But if Dr. Smazel, if you could join us to give us a walkthrough on policy 111 and the work that's been done with the proposal we have tonight.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, Chair Ellenberg, Superintendent Stanley, school board members, and community. A couple of updates on policy. We'll start with 111. So first of all, we do use our District Equity Advisory Committee to take certain policies back and get feedback from that team. So very appreciative of the feedback that we receive from them. part of the changes that we had proposed in policy was to change the language to make sure that it is representative of all student groups and to parallel language that is used in other policies like 514, 401, and 413 regarding protected class categories of students, and to move language from free and reduced price meals with the change in funding of how we offer meals in Minnesota to educational benefits, and to use that terminology. And then those were both in sections 2 and section 3C. And then in section 3B, adding the language from our strategic plan, section B4, about supporting and retaining culturally competent staff with diverse experiences and perspectives. So we made an addition to the policy in that respect. So those are the updates for 111.
Thank you. Are there any questions about 111?
I had 2 comments / questions. Under section 3 on administrative responsibilities, under B, I personally would recommend that we remove the reference to the strategic plan, because I feel like the policy should be timeless and not tied to any strategic plan. And it reads, and that should be our goal regardless.
Sure.
So I would just take out in alignment with the strategic plan and just start with the school district will support and retain quality, culturally competent staff. And then I also was wondering, do we take out the mention to a 5-year goal? Because depending on what year you're reading this, I thought the sentence read, we should set goals and strategies and supports for retaining staff of color to create a staff that is more reflective of the students that we serve, no matter if it's this year or 10 years from now. Yeah.
Yep, those are good. Thank you.
Those are my questions / edits. Just making sure it's timeless. Other than that, I appreciate all the updates.
Any other questions or discussions on 111? Okay, I know, Randy, you'll be able to give us an update later in action for 208, but if we move on to, just thinking about, 113, we'll take them in order with data requests. And Daphne, if you could give us a little background on 113. Thank you, Randy.
Hello, Chair Allenberg, Dr. Stanley, board members. I made some changes to the policy just to update some of the language to make it more 21st century, to add some more details based on current practice for what I've seen in terms of the data requests that have come in. Also to add some clarification regarding guidelines when someone would be charged for a data request and what that process would be. And in general, again, to add a few more details, and then also add a note about the time it takes to fulfilling a data request might vary some depending on the complexity of the request.
Thank you for the background. And any questions or discussion around 113?
I've got one question. So in the purpose, the school district recognizes its responsibility relative to the dissemination. The word relative, I'm getting pretty caught up on because I think we have to define it, right? So I keep getting caught up on our responsibility relative to the dissemination versus what is our responsibility. We're not really explaining what our responsibility is relative to it. It feels like there should at least be, if we're going to say that, there should be another defining statement below it somewhere, and I didn't see it. I just don't want it to be called into question anywhere.
Thank you. That's helpful. Other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you, Daphne. All right, I'd like to invite Sonia Saylor, Director of Human Resources, to join us with some background on 414 and 415.
Good evening, Chair Ellenberg, Dr. Stanley, Director Neville, and members of the school board. So just as a little background on 414 and 415, my understanding is in 2019, the decision was made by the school board to combine those two policies into one, which is your current board policy 415. 414 covers mandated reporting for child maltreatment, neglect, abuse, sexual abuse, whereas 415 covers mandated reporting of the maltreatment of vulnerable adults. When reviewing these policies, there had been some changes, some statutory changes that really made it cumbersome to keep them combined into one policy. Specifically, both policies used to be based off of statute 626.557, whereas now most of the mandated reporting of child neglect or child maltreatment is found under Minnesota Statute Chapter 260E. That changes some of the definitions are different between the two policies, which can make it a little confusing. And in addition, the reporting procedures are different between the two policies. And of course, the information found in these policies is incredibly important within a school district. And so after reviewing them and going, and meeting with the policy committee, my recommendation is that we go back to two policies, one for child maltreatment reporting and one for vulnerable adult maltreatment reporting, largely to aid the reader in understanding what their duties are as a mandated reporter. One difference between these two policies, as well as in Minnesota, we're required to provide every employee mandated reported training on an annual basis for child maltreatment. And so we do that at back to school time every year. And this explaining the reporting procedures can be complicated as well when you actually have two very different reporting procedures. So most of the language in both of these is MSBA language that comes directly from statute. I explained to the policy committee the only change I made, only modification I'm proposing in 414 is I did provide the exact reporting information for Edina, Hennepin County, and for the Minnesota Department of Education, just to aid, when somebody is in a situation where they have to make a mandated report of suspected child maltreatment. It can be a nerve-wracking experience. And so this way, everything is right here. They know they can go directly to the phone number for Hennepin County. They can go directly to the website, or excuse me, email address to make that report for MDE as well. And then in the vulnerable adults 415 board policy, it contains the information directly to make a report to the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center. So with that background, do you have any questions?
Thank you for the background. Any questions or clarification for 414 or 415? Director Bergman.
Clarifying question. You said that it was in 2019 that we combined the two?
That's my understanding. Polly Bowles stated in the paperwork that she provided to us that it looks like they were combined in 2019.
Is there any information from any existing board members who were there at the time as to the purpose of why that went that route versus where we're going back to something else?
Yeah, I think that I was on the policy committee then. I think that as they were written at the time, they were very similar. And the only distinguishing difference between the two was defining a child and an adult. And so we put them together.
Got it.
But I think that there's
now the
updated,
changes that
yeah.
have happened in clarification. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
I actually had one question or comment in policy, the 414. There's one instance where we reference his, her instead of their. And then I know this is an official Minnesota Department of Education form, but I found it, I didn't know if we could provide feedback to the Minnesota Department of Education that they actually require you to specify male or female for the alleged victim, as well as for the alleged offender. And if there was any way that we could update a form or give them feedback that they do not offer any options for individuals that don't identify as a male or female in their form.
Thank you. We'll see what we can find out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. I just,
if it's in the form, I don't know, but I think it's a worthwhile note. But did you say you also saw that language within the policy, or was it just in the form?
It was in the policy itself.
So it may have come from statute language.
Very well could
potentially.
have. It was
But we can
only
look.
one place.
Okay.
Everywhere else, it's either says child or student, and there's one place that said his or her, and I can find it again. But I just wanted to give you guys an update.
Thank you.
Other than that, I appreciate your guidance on this.
And Chair Ellenberg, I think that's an excellent observation on the confidential student maltreatment reporting form, and I will reach out to them.
I
We'll see
appreciate
if
that.
it
I don't.
changes.
It's just interesting.
No, it's important. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on 414 or 415? Thank you. Thank you, Director Saylor. Appreciate it. And one more policy for discussion. I'm going to invite Natasha Mansafeli back to the front. Policy 806, emergency management.
We're all about safety today. All right, good evening once again. Really with this policy around emergency management, I think if I look at it and the things that we changed were really around clarity. One of the things that we don't want to do in a safety situation is be ambiguous. And so a lot of the language and the updates in this policy were to provide that clarity and specificity as we continue to work through our emergency plans within our building. So with that, I will take your question.
I have another question. I'm just on a roll tonight.
All
Sorry.
right.
I was wondering if you could speak to its section 4, D. I was curious about the utilization of the term safe conditions and procedures, because it says safe conditions, and then it says hold, secure, lockdown, evacuate, and just using my frame of reference, like a lockdown and evacuation doesn't sound like a particularly safe condition to me. And so is that like a emergency definition? Because just in layman's terms, it sounds actually unsafe to me.
That's part of the ICS model, which is the Incident Command model. And the idea behind that is to get the building into a safe condition. And so what you're doing, or what the administrator is supposed to do, is make sure that the building's safe by enacting one of those conditions.
Okay, so I think it might be helpful to sort of put context around that says these are the procedures to get exactly what you just said, to ensure.
So could we add that to the definition on Part E in the front?
Yes.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, because when I read it, I was like, that's not safe at all. Maybe just saying these will be utilized in order to ensure our buildings can return to a safe condition. And maybe I'm the only one, so if everyone else thought it was crystal clear, I just.
No, I think the comment is helpful because, as Natasha said, the goal is clarity. So thank you.
That was all. Thank you.
I've got, I think, 2 questions. So, incident commander. So we talk about that being a person on site. It's a building principal, department administrator, or a designee. And in the situation we recently had where the incident commander was actually a non-EPS employee, my question was, are we saying here that, say similar to what just happened, that the police may take incident command, but that on our end, we would also have like a district incident command, so that person would also be kind of the sole person. I just wanted for
We always have our
clarification.
own building incident command, and when we involve our emergency personnel, that becomes unified command. So that means we own the students. That's the way they say it in the language. And so we would continue to own the safety of our students by having our own incident commander. But when an incident requires emergency personnel, then we move into unified command, where then police, fire, they're owning either the fire or they're owning the crime. And so we will always continue to have our own building incident commander through the duration of an incident.
Okay.
Oh
yeah, go ahead.
May I add, in the most recent situation that you're talking
Mhm.
about, that occurred off campus, and then because it ended on campus, right? It was different, but they wore the incident command because it started off campus.
Okay, that makes sense. The only other question I had was down under, what is this? Section 4, under emergency management elements, where you had in there and then crossed off highly contagious serious illness or pandemic flu. And I may have watched too many ER episodes in my lifetime, but why did that get crossed out? Like, say all of a sudden we have some crazy monkeypox outbreak in the school, we need to lock it down, right? Too many ER episodes, I know.
Yep,
That was
that's
my
a really
question.
good question. It was a question that came up in policy committee that we had conversation about, and we felt that warranted a different type of crisis response. This is like reacting to an emergency that's urgent. If monkeypox breaks out, we're probably not clearing out the whole building. And you know what I mean? Eventually, we're going to get kids out of the building, but it's not a fire drill. We're not evacuating students. We're not locking them down in the classroom. It just warrants a different type of response, we felt, than the things that were listed here.
So, what if it was a quarantine incident? That's my question. If the school had to go into quarantine. That was where I said, in my mind, I read it and I'm like, well, that's what that means. That means the school had to go into quarantine, a classroom had to go into quarantine, a wing had to go into quarantine.
The
That's
way
why
I read
it,
this
and then
is
it
that
said-
these are responses to things that would happen within minutes. If we were responding to a quarantine, there would be a process that would probably take more time. There's no time when there's an active shooter. There's no time when there's a bomb threat. And so those are things that require an urgent response that often end up with emergency personnel involved. It doesn't seem like, I'm not going to lose sleep over it if we want to add it, but a highly contagious illness just warrants a different type of response, probably more measured and a little bit slower until we figure out exactly what we're going to do or how we're going to move those students.
My understanding from our discussion in policy committee is what you're referring to, Director Shaw, what would fit under this policy would be the chemical or biological threat. So a biological threat that could cause, a serious illness, that would be very serious, but it's immediate. And it requires something with the incident command protocol. And again, the serious illness or pandemic flu, it's outside of that emergency. Or I think the difference is the element of time.
Yes.
And that's probably what differentiates.
And who would probably enact to respond to that? We would probably not enact the BERT to respond to a quarantine situation.
But thank you for
never
pointing
say
it out.
never, though.
I
We
mean,
did that
fair
in
enough.
January
Well,
of 2020.
I know.
guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else?
I have a
Director Gabler.
Oh,
yes.
I have a question. Remind me, is this a policy that we review or look at every year?
Now it is.
It is
It will be now. Okay, that's great. I was just clarifying that. And I noticed, because what prompted that is I scrolled to the bottom to see if we do review it every year, and it says adopted, revised, reviewed, and revised. Is there a difference when we review versus revise?
I think that's a good question. I don't know the answer for sure. My understanding is that reviewed did not result in any changes. It came before the board and there were no changes, but I think it's a good question and there might be a way for us to clarify how we use one word over the other.
I've been on the policy committee for 2 years and I just noticed that, so I don't think we need to go to great measures to change it.
Okay. But it's a good question, and that's my understanding, is it's noted because, yes, it did come before the board. but revised wouldn't be accurate.
Nothing needed to be changed.
The only other question that I had was under the communications section. One thing I've noticed in my time on the board is that there's always a constant need for immediate real-time communications of situations, but that the district might not always be legally able to provide all the details related to those communications. And I didn't know if it would be appropriate to have something in this section that states that or qualifies that what we're able to communicate in as real time and timely fashion as possible is under what is legally allowable. We don't really get to that in here, and I don't know if it's appropriate here or not, so I'm not recommending we do, but I'm just thinking that when we've had our recent incidences and stuff like that, there's a constant drive in the community, on social media, whatever it is, for information. But when we don't provide it, it's not as if we're not wanting to be transparent. We're not legally able to provide certain information in certain situations.
I don't have an answer to that, but I'm happy to connect with our district attorneys to see if they have any recommendations about the best way to proceed.
I don't, only if people think that that's an appropriate step to take. I don't know if it is or not.
Well, I think we can definitely take it back to the policy committee. You know, I appreciate you bringing it up, and we can talk about it further, but unless there are any other comments now.
I think if I'm understanding you correctly, I don't disagree with you, but I know we've talked at policy about how some of the like actual like how it actually plays out doesn't necessarily go into policy, where it's more the overarching like direction, where that might be at a detailed level that would be best practice or kind of what internally we know to be true, but wouldn't necessarily go into policy.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think my experience that I've seen is that people sometimes, when we are able to use policy to show, see here, under the legally allowable, this is what we're able to do, it's not a subjective decision, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So again, I don't know if it's appropriate or not. Going back to policy seems like an appropriate approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Everybody got the bedtime reminder? My watch just told me it's time to get ready for bed, but I don't know.
We better get going.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks.
I think this is, thank you. This is great.
Great. That is all for our discussion items. We have 2 action items tonight. Do I have a motion to approve the 2023-2025 assessment plan?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We would love to welcome Director Jody D. St. Hubert again. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone. We have the assessment plan in front of us, the 2023-25 assessment plan. It has been to the board for a board workshop discussion as well as a board meeting discussion in May. And the only changes are reflected on the board decision on COGAT in May. And if you dug deep into the report, the actual assessment plan has a tab for 23-24 on the bottom of it and 24-25 to reflect those differences in COGAT and how that will be implemented. Other than that, I present it to you for questions or action.
Director Neville? Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Questions or comments from board members? I just really appreciate all the work on this plan. It's really great, and I'm excited. As excited as you can be for testing. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All those in favor of approving the 2023-2025 assessment plan, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The 2023-2025 assessment plan is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to our policies. Do I have a motion to approve policies 208, 304, 305, 307, 503, 709, and 711?
So moved. Second.
Outstanding.
I wonder if the board would like a little background on policy 208, which has had some updates since we last saw it in discussion. Yes. Okay. And I'm wondering, Dr. Smazel, if you could walk us through these updates. So the changes are in, we had a lengthy policy committee discussion and clarification with MSBA regarding policies that need to be reviewed annually. So we have made some updates since we last saw the policy. Dr. Smazel.
Thank you. So at the end of policy 208, an appendix is an updated list of policies to review annually, which include 113, 414, 415, 506, 524, 634, and 806. And then policies removed from annual review are 410, 413, and I believe 522. And so, as Director Neville mentioned, these changes are being proposed and made based on feedback from Cabinet and from review of MSBA recommendations. 208 then will be listed as a cross-reference in these various policies. And then again, 208 will just list the policies to be reviewed on an annual basis. So that's it.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
All those in favor of approving policies 208, 304, 305, 307, 503, 709, and 711 say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The policies are now approved. And that ends our action items. Are there any board leadership or committee updates from board members?
I just wanted to pass along to the board and to Dr. Stanley. At my District 287 meeting last Thursday, at the end of the meeting, I had the vice chair who represents St. Louis Park come up beside me and to congratulate us on the Ultimate Frisbee State Championship that our boys team won. They played St. Louis Park, and it wasn't just about congratulations for the win, but she wanted to comment about, because her son played on the St. Louis Park team, how unbelievable the play, but also the sportsmanship and the whole dynamic of Ultimate Frisbee and how Edina presented itself, how it complemented St. Louis Park, how they played. So she gushed, even though her team lost, that she was so impressed by how our students handled themselves, and she really wanted to make sure that all of us knew that. So I wanted to pass that along.
Dr. Stanley, any leadership updates?
First of all, really excited. It was a week ago. It's hard to believe this now, but we did graduate 680 students. And so that is really exciting. And I've run into a couple of them in the community, and they're doing well. They're enjoying sleeping in. That's what they tell me. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was to read some shout outs. And so this first shout out is for Tyler Morris, who works in the community education department. And this is from Christine Dole to Julie Gaberslin. She says, I want to take a minute to glow about the work Tyler Morris has done for us at Valley View and what an amazing asset he is to our district. As I'm sure you're aware, Tyler displays the perfect balance of professionalism, humor, flexibility, and respectfulness for everyone he meets, regardless of the situation or personality. I've been absolutely blown away by how he carries the mission of our arts department forward with his visionary thinking, practical knowledge, and impressive background knowledge. I asked Tyler who I could send this to simply say thank you. And so I'm sending it to you. Thank you for having Tyler on staff and prioritizing this position in our district. Because of Tyler, our programs can function effectively and we can focus on what we do best, making music with students. What a blessing it has been to work with him as we continue to support the arts. Thank you. That was great. This is a shout out to the ELC. Hi, Dr. Stanley. I'm writing to give an end of the year shout out to the ELC. This is from Ann Tozer, who's a parent and an employee. I have a 4-year-old who just completed her first year at preschool, and my kindergartner also went to preschool there last year. We've had the absolute best experience with the team at the ELC. The classroom teachers are so thoughtful and caring. We love the aftercare program, and all of the paraprofessional staff has been wonderful too. This was the first school experience for both of my kids post-COVID, and we couldn't be happier. Both kids have been so happy to attend school each day. Happy end of the school year. Ann Tozer, who is a special education teacher in one of our schools. And last but not least, this is to Kirsten Darby, who is in our music program. And this is from Dr. Blanca Diaz de Leon. And I note that doctor because she just defended her dissertation. She's now Dr. Blanca Diaz de Leon. She writes this to Kristen and she CCs me on it. She says, Kristen, I'll take the opportunity to say how much I appreciate the job you do with each and every student. The creativity you had shown translating, using language line, connecting with other organizations like Give and Go, and putting all those resources together for families has removed barriers for families for many years and had a result in an amazing increase in Latino students participation in the orchestra program at the elementary level. I'm copying Dr. Stanley in this email for her to be aware of the great talent and care that you have had for many years with the families I work with and for all students across the district. I am glad that we will be able to keep working together. Thank you very much. Just really excited about the shout outs that I continue to receive and just want to take time to honor our employees who are doing amazing work across our district.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley, and thank you to all of our employees and all their outstanding work. On that, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
We will now vote to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The meeting is adjourned.